It was necromancing, which is the absolute worst skill a hunter could possibly have. A legendary individual who is currently one of just 5 hunters in the world to hold the SSS class. The public, on the other hand, has a low opinion of him due to the fact that he has spent his entire life working as a hunting dog for a business. Even when he was knocked out after receiving deadly wounds and being carried out of the gate, he managed to stay alive even after all of his co-workers perished, despite the fact that many thought he was repulsive. He was given the title of the Immortal King. Kang Tia is the one who is spared from death. It was a foregone conclusion that even he would not be able to escape the cave of death, because the guy who was responsible for it was none other than his rival from the guild that he was a member of. But Kango was able to endure the battle that lasted for 6 months. In addition, he made the decision to engage in combat with the Griffin's headquarters today. Kang stated that it seems as though the minor players each have their own desire for money. Just look at them coming in when they don't have a place of their own. And then he raises his hand to generate some pressure on the other hand. His adversaries were yelling at each other to eliminate Kang, and they don't care if he lives or dies as long as they get their hands on the 5 million golds that are being offered to the person who can catch him. Others have suggested that they must block him in order to prevent him from calling forth his bone dragon. Kang's adversary quickly strikes him with their sword, but Kang remains cool as he calls forth his bone dragon by using his might and placing his hand on the ground. After that, a tremendous amount of light and force appear. After then, his dragon materialized above him in the sky. As soon as they laid eyes on the dragon, his adversaries were overcome with shock and terror. They were completely at a loss as to how they might best Kang at that time. However, in the building where the fight was taking place, a light was shattered, and then it exploded as a result of the bone dragon's sudden flight as it attempted to flee the structure. Kang was positioned such that it appeared as though he was in control of the bone dragon while he stood on its neck. When Kang's opponent looks up and sees him with his bone dragon, they are shocked to see that he still possesses enough mana to summon the dragon on. The other hand, Kang abruptly cursed because he had used too much mana, which caused blood to come out of his mouth as a consequence. He quickly covers it with his hand as if nothing had happened. As his bone dragon went by a structure, he became aware that someone was standing there and looking in his direction. It was Yojudu Griffin's guildmaster, and said that he was completely surprised. In addition, he was standing by the window when Kang soared in front of him with his bone dragon, which was Dinger power in the shape of light in its mouth. Kang became aware of something approaching just as the dragon was about to launch its attack. It was a blow delivered by his adversaries on the ground who were striking him at the time, and they used a holy harpoon shape in the light. As a result of the harpoon, Kang's bone dragon grew agitated, and it collided with the building, causing one of its wings to be hit. As a result, his dragon stuttered in pain, and Kang directed the dragon to fly up. However, before they could get fly up, another harpoon struck his bone dragon, and he watched as the arrow entered the creature's skull. Afterwards, they are struck by multiple harpoons coming from a variety of directions, and each one of them penetrates a different section of the bone dragon. They both ended up falling to the ground, which resulted in the production of smoke and the destruction of the Ground Holy Knights team. "Seize him," exclaimed his opponent. Afterwards, Kang was trying to stand, but he was now surrounded by numerous knights. You told him to give up, but Kang didn't want to give up, and you never saw him giving up just like that. Yo's expression changes to a grin out of nowhere, and he comments that he hasn't seen Kang give up at any point. Kang managed to rise up despite the fact that blood was coming out of his mouth, and he furrowed his brow. As he did so, he inquires of you the reason behind his asking him such a pointless question. In response, you approached him while wielding a staff and moved closer to him. He stated that he desired for things to proceed exactly how he had anticipated it would. But Kang was the only one who consistently behaved in a manner that was inconsistent with his expectations. Kang defied his expectations to survive in that land of death, and emerged from the experience more powerful than he had expected. In the end, he even persisted and was successful in obtaining whatever it was that Kang was holding. On the other hand, Kang was seen clutching a nameless stone, and its quality and impact are unknown to anybody else. Kang brought the stone closer to him so that he could examine it more closely, and he questioned you as to whether or not he was referring to the stone. When you saw the nameless stone, his eyes immediately opened, and he burst out laughing. He then declared that the nameless stone is a sufficient justification for him to kill Kang. However, if Kang is willing to hand it up to him, he will release Kang without causing him any kind of pain. "You want this stone badly?" asked Kang. Yo urges Kang to hand over the stone because it is something that will be useful to him in the future. Kang is so convinced that Yo is correct that he uses his power to cause the stone to float in Yo's direction. The latter was anticipating that the stone would land in his hand. But Kang grabbed it out of nowhere and grinned. As he did so, he had been playing a prank on Yo, and Kang was not an idiot who would willingly give up the stone. Kang mentioned that he had heard that Yo had spent his entire life searching for that stone, because he had already consumed the stone he needed to find a way to retrieve it from inside his body. So he questioned you about whether or not he could kill him to get the stone inside his body. When you watched Kang swallow the stone, he was taken aback. As a consequence, he became infuriated and ordered all of his team members to cut open K's stomach in order to retrieve the stone. On the other hand, Kang formed a grin on his face and was creating a massive force on his hand. "I'll take as many as I can," as my comrade exclaimed Kang. Then strike his massive force towards his opponent in one blow, and in this manner, the horrendous night came to an end. And due to the fact that he was fatigued, it is okay to take a break, and he passed away. Afterwards, a senior citizen was shaken up and taken aback by something, while a younger man fought back the tear that was forming in his eye while trying to contain his elation at the fact that his young master had at last awake. The elderly man fled in terror because he believed the person lying on the casket was a ghost. Two individuals were having a conversation in the Jedong Palace about how the Buan clan's eldest son had been brought back to life. They are both interested in knowing what took place. They inquire as to whether or not the mortician is in fact a necromancer. According to the young person, the firstborn son did not return to life, but rather transformed into a Jungi after his death. According to the older person, the reason why he thought it was that way was because he read too much fiction. In addition to this, he claimed that the eldest son had ingested a large quantity of remedies, which led to his falling asleep and appearing to be a corpse. But the younger person reasoned that if it's I Shin 1, then it may very well be plausible. The older person cautions the younger person to watch what he says, since members of the Beacon clan may overhear what he has to say, but the younger person was too obstinate, and he reasoned out what the issue would be if the Beacon clan was now a tiger without teeth. Meanwhile, Kang stands up in his bed and searches for a mirror so that he can examine his appearance. When he looked in the mirror, he was shocked to see that he had grown so large that he resembled a pig. He pinched his cheeks as if the expression might shift, but it remained the same. He believed that through training his grinding bones, he was able to keep his muscles in good shape. But now he was reincarnated on a big body. Kang had also been told that the owner of the body he had reborn with was a prodigy who appeared to have spent his entire life feeding himself. El Gonga had an unhealthy obsession with food, ladies, and beverages. He abruptly laid his large frame down on the bed while thinking about him being a naked toddler who used a shovel to spread his feces all around the billboard, representing the Beacon clan. A person who in the end was unable to breathe due to his addiction to remedy. It was a mystery to Kang how he had come to be reincarnated as a pig in ancient China after living a dissolute life. Nameless stone is the sole factor that may have contributed to the occurrence of something like that. He recalled the reason that Yu was looking for the stone with such determination when he realized that the old man had missed the chance to revitalize himself right in front of his eyes, and that he must have been insane as a result. He couldn't help but break out in a spontaneous grin. He got out of bed all of a sudden when he had the notion, what is he doing when he can lose weight whenever he wants to, if he does his training routine just like he did in his previous life? But first and foremost, he has to ensure his own survival in that strange environment. He was taken aback when a hologram suddenly appeared in front of his face and informed him that the player was attempting to enter into the interface system, but there was an error because the player's information had changed since the last time they logged in. In addition to this, the hologram informed him that the player is in the process of updating its information and cautioned him that the disparity and quality between the player's soul and body was too great. When he saw his name as the player, his eyes widened in surprise. His trait at his necromancy, his strength was at level 7, his health was at level 6, his agility was at level 5, his magic power was at level 3, and his level was reduced to 1, because Kang appears to be losing interest in viewing the hologram. He gives the command for the hologram to disappear. He reassured himself that the necessary abilities were still present, which would allow him to gradually build up his power. But in addition to the strength, the hologram also indicated that the person embarked on necromancy, which means that they have not engaged in any form of physical conflict. However, he chose to disregard it, given that there was no way for him to go back to discover what the consequence of the nameless stone that he ingested in his former life was. All that was required of him was to pass away once more. But it wasn't the method either, because there's no way that there's a gate in Jedong from which he could obtain another nameless stone. He reassured himself that no matter what occurs, at least there are no monsters in that place. He was sick of engaging in bloody confrontations with those monsters, and the absence of creatures in that location means he can get away from that situation. He then breaks into a brawl as he realizes that he may now begin his life in that place as of that same instant. He shall henceforth be referred to as Yin. However, when someone unexpectedly entered his room, he was taken aback, and they complimented him on how well he appeared to be maintaining his good health. An individual was being prevented from entering the room by a servant who was following close behind them. It was Yugen Sayang who was involved. Because his master had instructed him not to let anybody else inside the chamber, the servant was pleading with Jin S not to enter the room. However, the servant is unable to finish his sentence because Jin Sang became enraged and told the servant that he had the audacity to issue orders despite the fact that he was only a servant. K, who was wondering who Jin Sang was watching what was taking place, when all of a sudden he stepped over to the servant and asked him if he was okay. Jin Sang scoffed, however, and stated that even if W were to be resurrected, he would continue to be as stupid as he was before. However, the servant suddenly falls on his knees and begs one for mercy, explaining that WW had commanded him not to let anybody else. Jin Sang stops the lowly servant in the middle of his speech, saying that one is taking care of the humble servant, even though it doesn't suit him, and the servant is unable to finish his sentence on the other hand. Kang approaches the servant and inquires about his ability to stand. He kneels down to go closer to the servant so that the servant might assist him in standing, and he suddenly asks who Jin Sang is. The servant hears him, whispering that Jin Sang was actually his half-brother. Afterwards, Jin Sang questioned WW about the reason he didn't react to the inquiry that he made. On the other hand, an elderly man walked into his room and told him that wound may have lost his memory and didn't recognize his half-brother. Additionally, he instructed W to show magnanimity and pardon to Jin Sang. Quack Wan was his name, and he was the leader of the Red Clouds faction. Kang was taken aback when his servant abruptly cautioned Quack to watch what he said in front of the young master because he needed to refer to wound his lord at that very moment. Kang had the impression, based on the information he had received over the course of the previous several days, that the lord, his father, Yo-Yol, had fallen ill, and that the role of lord was now vacant. But the fact that Quack refers to Jin Sang as a lord demonstrates that he is disregarding him. In addition, Quack observed that Wound had immediately furrowed his brow. So he explained that he had unintentionally referred to Jin Sang as lord, because the latter had taken over the post after the former fainted. Jin Sang, on the other hand, cautioned quiet to exercise caution, since it could make Wound feel bad. After which, they would both laugh as though they were laughing at Wu Kang, on the other hand, ruminates on the origin of the two Cretans in this conversation. When Quack referred to Jin Sang once more as lord and looked to be making fun of him, he grew enraged. Quack then informs Jin Sang that it is time for them to meet with the leader of the faction. So Quack explains that this is because they had previously checked Wound's health. Quack was instructed by the leader of the faction that he must make elaborate preparations in order to extend his congratulations to the leader of Dong. They were laughing so hard that they didn't see when Wound suddenly jumped towards them and smacked Jin on the neck. This occurred as the two were getting ready to leave the place. Quack immediately whirled around and was enraged. However, he was taken aback when he saw that Wound had allowed the punch to be delivered. He thought to himself that it's not like he didn't sense Wound, but how could he be squared by a guy who hasn't even learned martial arts the right way? He was confused, however, because of the rage that was welling up inside of him. Jin Sang's brow became wrinkled. He suddenly switched his attention to Wound just as he was ready to draw his blade and execute his plan to kill him. However, he suddenly became frightened and was unable to grasp his sword because he observed something peculiar at Wound. Quack was bewildered because he observed that Jin Sang, who was now perspiring, did not draw his sword. In addition, Quack became aware that the door to Wound's room was ajar and that other people were observing them from outside. Because of this, he communicates with Jin Sang, using his mind, telling her that they need to wrap it up and head back, because there are a lot of eyes watching them. Kang was oblivious to the fact that they are speaking non-verbally, and will not question whether or not it is the complete tone he learned about in martial arts. The servant that was on his side did not fully understand what had taken place. However, Quack and Jin Sang unexpectedly walked through the door together, and Jin Sang commented to Quack that his half-brother appears to be acting irrationally before leaving W and the servant. Kang suddenly sighs in relief and thinks that Jin Sang was not that big, but as soon as he felt something on his head, he furrowed his brow and clenched his teeth in a startling display of anger. The servant, who was so concerned about him, inquired as to whether or not he was okay and whether or not he should contact the medical personnel. Kang heard a voice and said that he should have lived as a prodigy until the end. According to his character, he was coveting the position of the Lord after all those years, won't suddenly hold his head as if he was in pain. In his mind, he saw Jin Sang and said that if he had been giving up back, then he would have died in the hands of his only little brother. Now, rest in peace. Next to Father Jin Sang, added Kang witnessed Jin Sang pouring the liquid from a bottle onto W's mouth. While holding the bottle, Kang instantly let out a curse after coming to the realization that Jin Sang had poisoned WW as well as their father. He was perplexed and questioned what he saw and heard, wondering if it was actually Wound's memories. Creating a target out of Wound by engaging in combat with him despite the fact that W has no knowledge of martial arts, Jin Sang was aware of W attempts to find assistance, but he did nothing as his half-brother suffered. Kang also stated that Jin Sang was a pig who shows himself intentionally sleeping with a woman who has taken a marriage vow. Jin Sang was referred to as a bastard by Kang. Kang felt pity for Shin Wound, and a tear wanted to fall on his eye. He suddenly looked at his hand that he used on hitting Jin Sang. His eyes widened when he realized he ended up committing a huge accident. The servant was confused by his behavior when he suddenly sat as if he was a kid crying because he thought that the back of Jin Sang, who killed the body that he used, was returned as level 1. It looks like it's the end for him, since he walked the back of his head, and things are flowing just like in the previous life. The servant walks up to him and inquires as to what the master means when he says that it's the end. While Kang was sobbing, he turned to the servant and asked where the location was that had the most number of people who had been killed by the bad guys. The servant was bewildered and speechless. He had no idea what to say. In addition, Kang was still wailing. He had the misconception that being the firstborn child of that family would grant him special privileges. But in reality, he was about to meet his demise as soon as he woke. Jin Sang was holding a vase when he suddenly hurled it on the ground in a fit of rage because of what wound had done to him. How dare that worthless piece of trash! Jin Sang let out a yell. He questioned Quack about whether or not he ought to go now and rip him to shreds. Quack, however, ordered the guards to be dismissed, and then he advised Jin Sang to compose himself because so many people were watching. But Jin Sang was showing signs of extreme rage, as seen by the furrowing of his brows and the clenching of his teeth. He asks Quack how he can keep his cool if WW had the nerve to put his hands on him, despite the fact that W isn't even capable of competing with him before waking up. Quack observed as Jin Sang's rage caused him to lose his mind. He thought that Jin Sang did not understand that he let Shin Wan get in his blind spot, since there's no way for someone like Shin WW who hasn't studied martial arts. Then he abruptly paused his thoughts because he might overthink everything. Then Quack approached Jin Sang and reassured him that he should not be concerned because Shin Wan will soon pass away once more. When Quack tells Jin Sang that it wouldn't be strange for a person who has already passed away wants to pass away again after that, Jin Sang suddenly stops Quack also stated that he will give instructions to their most reliable disciple to complete the arrangements for the ceremony. Then he left Jin Sang. After hearing those remarks, Jin Sang instantly laughed and thought that Shin Wan was a lucky bastard. Even if Shin Wan had gotten lucky before Jin Sang was going to convert Shin Wan into a corpse, so he knew that Shin Wan would not get lucky again. Afterward, the name Blood Mist Valley was given to the valley when the moon was shining upon it, since it is impossible to survive there as a result of the unintended consequences of the spells performed by both sides. Approximately 200 years ago, the battlefield in the Great War was in most of the substance, a place so restricted that even a native of Hangzhou would steer clear of it. However, Kam was quickly running out of breath as he climbed the valley, since the body that he had reincarnated into, and which had previously belonged to Shin Wan, was so difficult to move due to the fact that it was excessively large. When he finally enters the restricted area, despite the fact that he was beginning to perspire, he breaks into a broad smile because he realizes that this is the ideal setting for practicing his necromancy. Because of the number of violent deaths that took place there, he reasoned the ground in that area has taken on a distinct hue, which indicates the presence of a powerful spirit. However, there are a lot of them that he wants to take, but for the time being, he can only take the white ones. He laid his palm on the area of the ground that was white, and all of a sudden, light appeared upward on the ground. It is indicated by the hologram that his skilled death has been triggered, and that his spirit is compatible with the present skill rating. He was now extracting the souls of the departed out of their bodies. He was informed by the hologram that he had successfully extracted spirit from the deceased and absorbed it into his body. In addition to this, he was able to distill spirits of a greater quality. As he advanced in rank and mastery, he was now absorbing the Kai of the dead man's poison. Because of his talent in poison resistance, the incoming damage has been partially mitigated. The hologram also cautioned him about the potential for mental shock and informed him that he would briefly be able to hear the dead. On the other hand, because of the force that he was experiencing, Kang's teeth were clenched and he was sweating profusely. He believed that in order to succeed, he had to go through the same struggles too. However, that is only true for typical necromancers, is due to the fact that he was accustomed to the suffering. The hologram alerted him abruptly to the fact that he was currently absorbing a small quantity of yin mana from the deceased. That was the reason for his quick clenching of his fist. He has now reached level 2, at which point additional skills will become available to him. These include the skill of skeleton mastery, the skill of hypnosis, an increase in his attack at the new level 3, and an increase in his dexterity at the new level 2 in level 4. Not only did his mana and health both grow, but his an also grew by 3 on. The other hand, it was only for applying the skills once, and he could hardly do that with the hordes of low-rank monsters he had to slay. When he watched the notification appear on the hologram, he pondered the question of why his mastery had increased by 3. For just one use, he believed that it was a useful bonus for veterans of the game, but he is willing to take advantage of it because he can unlock skills by either meeting the requirements or leveling up. Now is the time for him to put his newly acquired skills to the test. He reasoned that in contrast to yang mana, he needed to amass a greater quantity of yin mana in order to properly care for the large physique he possessed. He relaxes on the floor and allows his body to move about freely. In spite of the fact that there was blood on his mouth, he bent his body after that. He will experience a pain that was penetrating through his entire body, and it will appear as though a light has been tied around his body. Even though it's painful, he needs to keep his attention on the task at hand until the light reaches his heart. Another notice appeared informing him that the condition had been met, allowing him to unlock another talent associated with Yin Mana Heart. Kang did this because in order for a person to handle mana, they need a circuit that can store mana as well as a mana-capable heart. The greater the number of circles counted around a mana heart, the more yin mana it is able to store is the number of circles increases. After that, he let out a sigh of relief. He claimed that he can feel the filth burning on his body and that it is gradually having an effect on him. In contrast to the other necromancers, Kang Tia made the decision to transform his heart into a mana library rather than his brain. The use of mana derived from the brain increases the risk of developing dementia, even if just temporarily. Their mental and physical capacities are deteriorating at an alarming rate as their yin mana level rises. Kanga, being the only person in the world to employ yin mana heart, was spared from experiencing any negative repercussions. However, Kang will try to summon the skeleton. He raises his hand and releases a force that forms lights into the ground. That light released a skeleton who was holding a sword. He walked close to the skeleton. He felt strange after he saw the first creature that he summoned. He thought that it's not good in combat, but he can use it as a scout then. He lifts his 2 fingers. Then the skeleton releases a light smoke on its mouth and eyes. He summoned another skeleton to test their combat, but Kang was confused when the skeleton gradually vanished. He asked himself if the heart chain is gone, but is expecting it because the amount of mana in that world is only half of the mana in his previous world, and it explains why the skeleton has little mana. He reasoned that if the feed body of a monster that was carrying a mana stone had a yin mana value of approximately 10, then the value of that world would be approximately 1. He instantly let out a sigh, since it is impossible to change the situation if there is neither mana nor a monster. After that, he repeated the step where he placed his hand on the ground, and he will now attempt the Death Kai extraction. On the other hand, a few days had gone by at this point. Kang was sneaking up peek beyond the wall when he realized that the security around the home had been beefed up, which led him to conclude that they were observing him and there is no doubt that his half-brother Jin S was the mastermind behind that. He gritted his teeth in irritation because if he had a stealth skill, he could have already strangled those guards. Including his half-brother, he tightened his jaw. But despite the fact that he was in a hurry, he shouldn't rush into making any harsh decisions. Therefore, he has left the location where he had been hiding, and he needs to return to his room in order to investigate potential means of evasion. When he was abruptly looking around when he was in his window, he did it because he was concerned that someone might have seen him sneaking out. Because he was exerting so much effort to go through the window, he clenched his teeth and began to perspire heavily. It was difficult for him to walk around in his new body because it was much larger than the one he had previously inhabited. When he finally entered his room, he made a vow to himself that he would start exercising and eating healthier. But when he noticed a man standing in the shadows, he was taken aback, and he opened his eyes in surprise. After suddenly activating his Mona circle, he dashes towards the other individual. Kang immediately covered his lips so that he would not be able to generate any noise, and he pointed his hand on the man's neck when the man turned around and was going to shout. When Kang realized that the man was his servant Wang Sam, he was taken aback by the revelation. He suddenly lost his tight grip on Sam and asked him what he was doing in his room without permission, while Sam was trying to apologize to Ken. He was simultaneously struggling to catch his breath. Sam was advised by the latter to forget about the situation, but he was required to explain why he was in his room. Kang was under the impression that Jin Sang had given the command. However, he was perplexed when Sam asked him if he was going outside again, because Sam had just noticed that Kang always leave his room at night. When Kang furrowed his brow, Sam remarked abruptly that he didn't tell anyone else, therefore there was no need for Kang to be concerned about it. Kang, on the other hand, glanced at Sam for a moment before deciding that it appeared as though he wasn't lying. However, he was taken aback and baffled when Sam asked to come with him, and then abruptly ran outside. The only source of illumination for Sam and Shin W was the moon. They were on the verge of going inside a shed when Sam stopped Shin 1 and informed him that he didn't have to be concerned because it had never been used before unless no one would ever go there. Shin 1 was left bewildered as Sam attempted to lift a large box, and as a result of this action, a hole was discovered. Sam revealed to Shin W that the hole was an escape route that other servants had been aware of in the past, but that at that time he was the only one who knew about it. He also stated that he would not inquire as to where Shin W was going or why he was going there, since he believed that Shin W had a valid explanation for his actions. He inquires about Shin 1, and he plans to wait for him till he returns before proceeding. On the other hand, Shin 1 was under the impression that Sam wouldn't be able to stay alive if Jin Sang found out that Sam had told him about that location and assisted him. He wonders to himself if Sam has any awareness of the repercussions that may ensue if he is discovered. In addition to this, he shared with Sam that while he doesn't currently trust anybody else, he would like to put his faith in Sam for at least one time. "Will you trust me too?" he added, when Sam disclosed to Shin 1 that he places his faith in him. He then quickly extended an apology in advance before placing his hand on Sam's head. Shin 1 makes use of his charm ability in order to ask questions, which leaves the other person with no time to ask questions. Shin 1, on the other hand, was perplexed because of the response that Sam gave, which was to become instantly bewildered and to remain silent. He was worried about whether or not the charm had actually been successful. He reasoned that perhaps this was the case because the procedure had been carried out on a person who had opened their heart in front of a caster. Shin 1 begins his line of questioning by inquiring to Sam about the nature of his relationship with Jin Sang. Sam informed him that there is no connection between Jin Sang and him. In point of fact, Jin Sang despises him very much, and the reason for this is, well, he can't finish his sentence because Shin 1 interrupted him and asked him why he followed him to such an extreme degree. Shin 1 was under the impression that the effect of the charm was too potent, possibly because the inhabitants of that world lack any form of mental defense. However, Sam explains that the reason he followed Shin-won was because he was a pure and generous guy who treated him as if he was Shin-W's younger brother. When he was younger, however, after the death of Shin-W's mother, the concubine and Jin Sang began to harass Shin-won, which caused the latter's personality to become distorted. He began to beat him and treat him harshly, but Sam has faith that Shin-won will one day change back into a nice and innocent person. After hearing Sam, he immediately snapped his finger to disable the charm talent and claimed that Sam was too stubborn when everyone abandoned him. Yet Sam still followed him. He had the impression that he was treated like a monster throughout his entire life. But he now knows that he can trust someone to have his back. Shin-W noted that Sam abruptly felt his head and appeared to suffer pain as a result of the charm skill that he employs. As a result of this, Shin-won advised him to take a short break and lay down for a while. Shin-won crawls into the hole and tells Sam that he will return later. "Yes, master, I understand," utters Sam. Meanwhile, Shin-won was informed by the hologram that his level had been raised to 10, and that his mana heart yin had also been raised to the C rank. Shin-won was sweating because he was holding a force in his hand, and he believed that it easily followed the mana circuit. Shin-won also believed that because it readily followed the mana circuit, he could easily combine it with the in mana, and he had no choice but to give it a try. When the circuit broke through his chest and entered his heart, he was perplexed and appeared to be frowning while blood poured from his mouth. He was having a hard time, but if he didn't get himself together, his mana circuit would blow up, since it wouldn't allow even an ounce of power through. That was bad, because the yin mana will reject it. However, the hologram informed him that his Necrom had advanced to the D rank level, and that the mana circle on the mana heart of yin had reached the second circle. In addition, the seals on the bone armor, the shadow bind, and the evil eye have all been strengthened, while the skeleton mastery has been downgraded to the D rank level. Shin-won is standing and heaving a sigh of satisfaction as he realizes that he has finally completed level 10. Even though he had just informed himself that he hadn't gained a new skill in a while, 3 of them suddenly appeared. It came as a bit of a letdown to him to learn that all of them were merely support of talents. When will he be able to learn talents such as bone spears and corpse explosion? He wonders to himself. Shin-won's necromancy, on the other hand, has reached the D rank, which allows him to extract Death Kai more effectively. But when he peered at those lights on the ground, he was perplexed, since the sensations of a white-level spirit and a blue-level spirit were completely distinct, and he had just recently experienced something similar to that. Then he remembered Yujin Sang and Guakwon, and they had a sensation that was comparable to that. "Is this what Kai is?" he uttered. In addition, above the blue-level spirits, the amount of yin mana is exceedingly low, but there is also a potent, unexplained force. They emanate a devastating aura similar to that of the yin man, which is proportional to the power that is able to be drawn from their personalities and skills. However, Shin-won was concerned that what he was about to undertake was too risky, and he pondered to himself whether or not he ought to start off with the less stressful option. Instead, he put his hand on top of the ground, and a blue light became visible and stretched for his hand. He did this because he was interested in the unknown power on the ground, and he thought that perhaps he might use it as a replacement for the in mana. As the light passed through his fingers, he began to perspire and was bewildered since he felt hot, yet had no rejection. Additionally, it was simple to follow the mana circuit, and he was able to effortlessly mix it with the yin mana. After that, he made an effort, but his brow was furrowed, and blood was dripping out of his mouth. But despite the fact that he was struggling and his hands were gripped, he kept on. Even as the light traveled through his body all the way to his heart, if he keeps doing it, his mana circuit is going to blow up, since it didn't absorb any amount of power, not even an ounce. And this is bad because Yin Manana is going to reject it. In addition, Shin Wun has convinced himself that it is not feasible to reach the Mona heart by utilizing that strength because of the force that he generated. He was seen clenching his teeth, and his forehead revealed veins that were visible because he has no other option. He will have to start a new mono library in order to store the power, because generating new mana is a difficult process that places an excessive amount of pressure on the body. However, there is not sufficient energy in the location, and in order for him to survive, he will need to seize the power for himself. However, due to the fact that his body was fighting against the power, he focused all of his concentration on accumulating the power. "Stop fighting and gather down here," he exclaimed. However, after a period of battling and experiencing pain, he suddenly laughed and laid down on the ground because he had succeeded in absorbing the power. On the other hand, the hologram arrives and declares that Shin Won has been successful in absorbing the strange power from the deceased, that the power has been identified, and that he has now absorbed 30 days' worth of RTF flowing clouds. Afterwards, Shin Won laughs to himself after reading the hologram. Since he now has a Kai that has increased to level 10, and his mana has increased to a maximum of 200, because the type of Kai on the second library mana is one it indicates that he is capable of storing a wide variety of Kai types, because he had read that there is a negative effect in mixing too many types, and that his Kai would burst inside of him if he did so. Despite the fact that it sounded appealing, he needed to find a means. Nevertheless, all of a sudden, he takes attention to what is being described as art-flowing clouds. According to the hologram, the art-flowing clouds is the most fundamental breathing method that the Yellow Mountain faction teaches its apprentices. A holographic also explains that the techniques defining TRA is that it utilizes the practitioner's Kai. It is of the second rate and possesses blade qualities in addition to its rank. However, because of the slow rate at which it accumulates power, it is challenging to master. He jumped up all of a sudden and questioned himself, should I try the art-flowing cloud? However, he was apprehensive, which is why he chose to try it when he completely grasped what the art-flowing cloud was. Shin Won raises his hand and thinks to himself, how shall I use the mana and the Kai? As he does so, following that he issues an order for the skeleton warrior to stand. Shin Won was perplexed because he had only used the yin mana because he believed there would be some negative side effects, but he questioned whether or not his control had already improved while he was gazing at the skeleton warrior who had suddenly appeared and was carrying an axe. Afterwards, he was utilizing his Kai in an attempt to summon a skeleton. He raises his palm, and an energy goes by his heart, which is positioned at his chest. Although he didn't intend it, he was pleased by this. As the in mana mingled with the Kai, he took a glance at his hand, and was surprised to see the amount of power he already held, and he was only becoming stronger. As a result, he conjured forth another skeleton that emerged from the ground as he placed his hand there. When he saw the skeleton, which appeared to be very large, his jaw dropped. Now this is it, he uttered while forming a smile on his face. Shin Won was so confused about the two skeletons that he summoned and didn't know what's going on. He turns to the skeleton without clothes, who has only the characteristics of white skeleton swordsman, with the strength of 18, agility of 16, health 16, magic power of 5, and seems like a level 7. However, the skeleton with clothes has a characteristic of a third class warrior. Its skill is Flowing Cloud 13 Sword. The strength was 50. Its agility was 31 and has experience for about 1 year afterwards. Shin Won suddenly got interested in the skeleton with clothes because its strength was higher than him, and also being able to use martial arts on top of that. He thought that the only thing he needed to be cautious eye about was his experiences, and that means summoning the skeleton with clothes purely through mana is impossible. And since the skeleton was already summoned, he had to check it out So he lifts his finger and commands the two skeletons to make a combat. After that, the two skeletons abruptly formed their stance and were about to attack each other. The white skeleton leaps up unexpectedly and raises his weapon in preparation for an assault on the skeleton warrior. However, the skeleton warrior sidestepped his blow. Because of this, the weapon that belonged to the white skeleton fell to the ground. However, the white skeleton continues to strike out at the skeleton warrior, who continues to avoid each blow, and as a result of the final blow that the white skeleton delivers, he suddenly falls to his knees on the ground. And it is now time for the skeleton warrior to launch an assault on him. Nevertheless, Shin Wun was keeping a close eye on them. He observed the footwork that the white skeleton executed, but the skeleton warrior lost all of his health in such a short amount of time. On the other hand, the skeleton warrior suddenly sprang up, and the white skeleton was about to assault it when it suddenly stood up as well and went to attack it. They were both moving quite quickly as they got closer to one another. However, the white skeleton was taken aback when the skeleton warrior unleashed a force in its weapon and struck. As a consequence of this, the force that the skeleton warrior unleashed impacted the weapon of the white skeleton, and it was flung because the white skeleton used his weapon to dodge the force that the skeleton warrior unleashed. When Shin W gave the command for it to stop, the skeleton warrior suddenly stopped just as he was about to hit the white tiger in the neck. However, Shin Won was impressed by their fighting prowess, so he decided to deactivate his summoning power, which resulted in the two skeletons gradually disappearing into the ground. He activates the status window, and then the hologram appears. He makes a remark about how the two skeletons have been fighting for a considerable length of time, but the total quantity of Kai that they have used is just 10. He still has some Mon available to him. He wondered himself if it was because it was more effective when partnered with Kai. And if that was the case, that was good news for him, especially considering how difficult it was for him to absorb yin mana at the moment. While his inner Kai didn't appear to replenish on its own, in addition, he reasoned that there were two ways to solve his issue. Either he should find a service guy and extract the death Kai from him just like he did, or else he should train in martial arts afterwards. When Sam discovered that his master had an interest in martial arts, he was taken aback. He had the impression that his teacher had spent his entire life trying to stay out of fights, but now he has become interested in learning martial arts, which is something new for him. Therefore, he inquired with his master about the type of martial arts he should study. In response, Shin Won inquires of Sam regarding the possibility of the existence of a martial art that is capable of absorbing the inner Kai of the adversary. On the other hand, Sam unexpectedly turned his head to glance behind him because he was concerned that there were people nearby who could overhear their chat and ask his master to speak more quietly. He inquired if it was the absorption technique that he wanted to learn, and then he told his master not to ask anything about absorption Kai. He did this because, as a result of the conflict that occurred 30 years ago, many people have been detained recently, even if it was for nothing more than uttering the maw of magic. In addition to that, he cautions his master to watch what he says at all times, regardless of where he is. Sam was continuing trying to explain things to Shin Won, but the latter appeared uninterested and kept trying to cover his ears because of how loud Sam was being. However, Shin Won pays no attention to what Sam has to say about it, and instead thinks about the demonic arts and the art of flowing clouds. However, the art of energy absorption is the thing that he needs to keep in the back of his mind the most after that. Shin Won abruptly rose up and let out a sigh as he appeared to be dozing off. For some reason, he gave Sam the directive to inform him of the locations at which the members of the Beyond clan learned and practiced martial art S. In response to his master's question, Sam informed him that there is a library where all the documents that have been passed down through the years are collected and archived. In addition, Shin Won put his hand on the servant's shoulder and extended an invitation for him to accompany him to the library. However, the servants were not permitted to enter the library, so Shin Won made a promise to the servant that if he ever became the owner of the palace, he would make it possible for him to access the library. The servants were at a loss for words and appeared astonished by the situation. Sam, upon observing that his master was going to depart, remarked that he would remain here and wait for his return. In addition to this, as Shin Won was ready to leave, he abruptly turned around and asked his servant, who throughout the history of the Beacon clan has been considered to be the strongest. In response, Sam became excited when he told his master that the strongest in the history was Lord Yu Young, the one who established the Beacon clan 200 years ago. After Lord Yuong rose up and became the strongest, he was termed the Fun Gumo by the people. Okay, I'll get it. I'll get going. Utter Shin Won, on the other hand. Shin Won proceeded to the library with his usual composure. As he walked there, he was considering Lord Yu, who asserts that he is the strongest person in history he is unable to fathom. The military prestige that Lord Yu possesses, the rankings, were third class, second class, and first class crown, and transcendence, and the skeleton that he had built previously was most certainly of the third class variety on the other hand. He needed to determine how great of a power gap there would be between a transcendent soldier and a third-class swordsman. In addition, something about the way people were talking behind his back when he walked by them attracted his notice and drew his attention. A lady has commented that Shin Won appears to have lost weight and warned against making eye contact with him due to the possibility that he is drunk. The old man, however, claims that it appears as though he did not go to the jibbing, which is an Eastern hostess bar, and that he did not consume alcohol these days. However, the lady told the man to wait, since Shin Won was going to be arranging the bed linens in a short while. However, Shin Won chooses to disregard the rumors that have been spread about him and instead wonders aloud whether there is someone more infamous than their rumors. Because his senses have been heightened, Shin W is now able to hear a wide variety of things. He made the decision to separate himself from the people who were spreading rumors about him, since he knew that people of that nature would invariably follow the powerful one. But he reasoned that since his reputation could not fall any worse, he would be forced to do whatever was necessary, despite the fact that he had never intended to take the role of a benevolent monarch in the first place afterwards. At the main entrance of the Gathering Cloud Library, there were 3 men standing watch. When they saw Shin W walking towards them, everyone was taken aback and baffled by what they saw. Shin Won was confronted by the one who appeared to be the leader, who appeared as though he could not believe that Shin Won was present, and asked Shin Won what brought him to the library. He speculates to himself whether or not the man in front of him was the head gang, a typical sleazy opportunist, and it appears that he was also a follower of Jin Sang. Shin W asked the leader what else he thought he would come to the library, of course, to read. However, the man seemed to be thinking and was teasing him, and said that there were no books Shin Won was looking for in the library. "How would you know what book I'm looking for?" asked Shin Won. In response, the 3 men laugh at him all of a sudden, and the top gang member says the book is not the one he was searching for, because the book he was looking depicted a lot of lingerie. The head gang believed that it was a chance for him if he insulted Shin Won and shooed him away, as this would cause his master Jin Sang to pay attention to him after that. Shin Won abruptly lets out a sigh of frustration and puts his head in his hands because of the annoyance that he was feeling. He claimed that the problem which follows him wherever he goes is that those tiny worms might meddle without knowing where they are. After hearing that Shin Won had referred to him as a worm, the head gang member furrowed his brow and became agitated consequently. He confronted Shin Won, but Shin W was annoyed with the head gang, so he told him to step aside, and then turned around to go into the library. However, the head gang suddenly put his hand on Shin W's shoulder to prevent him from continuing. Shin W shocked the head gang when he abruptly turned his eyes on him, flashed a fiery crimson, and became furious after that. Shin W removed the hand of the head gang member that had been resting on his shoulder. The head gang member was now trembling in dread and sweating. Shin W then left them and entered the door. However, the head gang seemed to be taken aback, which is why his two comrades were trying to get his attention by asking why he could so casually allow Shin Won travel through the library. And what about the faction leader, Quack? Because the leader of the gang appears to be perplexed, they continue to scream out his name. Despite this, the head gang was dripping with sweat from head to toe and shivering with anxiety. In his head, he communicated to his two other comrades that he needed help, since he had seen Shin Won's eye and realized that it did not belong to a human. It was like reliving the terrifying experience he had the first time he saw a tiger for the first time. In addition to this, his two comrades both dropped their jaws and were taken aback by the fact that he did urinate on his pants out of fear for Shin Woo. The head gang was still surprised and still shaking in terror, which is why his two comrades carried him, because he might do a bigger one in addition to peeing if he saw Shin wound twice. And they will take the head gang to the clinic in addition. One of the head gang's comrades unexpectedly directs his attention to Shin W, who has arrived at the library at last. He was thinking about how Shin Won had scared their head gang, but he reasoned that Shin Won changed his attitude after returning from the dead and asked himself if he was a son of a tiger. However, Terror Eyes worked perfectly for Shin Won, despite being drank. Inside the Beacon Clan Red Cloud Tower, faction leader Quack pushes a door that leads to the underground and enters a room where numerous people wearing red masks and clothes, a mummy lying on a bed, and a statue of some creature seems waiting for him. Harm, vice leader of the Red Cloud, greeted Quack. The latter asked Harm, still not adjusted to their setup. However, Hayam suddenly bowed his head and apologized to Quack because he must still have habits from the sect, but he will keep everything in mind. Harm was informed by Quack that Shin Won had reportedly visited the Gathering Cloud Library. However, Harm reasoned that Shin W's activities were still within their expectation and that he must have been afraid of his abrupt death, followed by his revival in such a manner because of his deeds. On the other hand, Quack immediately thought, since what Hajam said was exactly his thought. But the issue is that it does not appear that way to the child. Hajam suddenly sighed, because Jin Sang was the reason for Quack's annoyance, even after they firmly built his foundation. According to Quack, the natural stupidity of Jin Sang was the reason why they chose him. Then Hajam suddenly thought that Jin Sang might be good for them. He explained to him that if someone who doesn't know a single thing about martial arts and learns it from some random book suffers from a state of chaotic inner energy, then they would have solved their problem without lifting a finger. Quack suddenly forms a grin on his face, then says that it's a possibility, but they have to get some insurance first. However, Han was going to report something on Quack, but since he was there, he showed him something behind his back and told him that they had already concluded their preparations. Quack, on the other hand, was relieved when he discovered mummified remains in the bed and the skeleton of an unknown species hung on the wall. Under the skeleton were a number of human head skeletons. Quack issued the command for his subordinates to carry it out tonight without delay. They dedicated their efforts in every way to the red sky, then he parted ways with them. On the other hand, in the Gathering Cloud Library, there were two people guarding the entrance. A person with black hair asks his companion if it's really fine to leave Shin wound like that, and what will they do if he becomes mentally unstable. The bald man, who seems sleepy, scolds him for being noisy and reminds him not to give any help for Shin Woo if he doesn't want to be kicked out of the clan when Jin Sang becomes the leader. The bald man also reminds his companion not to bother interfering when Shin Won was learning martial arts or trading it away, and think of his family when the person with black hair said that there shouldn't be proper martial arts books left in the Dion clan's library nowadays. However, Shin Won was inside the library and heard all the conversations of the guards outside, he told himself that it doesn't make sense to try learning martial arts by pulling out any book. Anyway, he doesn't need any help from the guards because it looks like he's just skimming over things in their eyes. He was reading about the art of the Black Wolf Judge, the hologram, that states that it's a martial arts used by Dead Sea Black Wolf Doas Su, who was infamous among the vagabonds in the Hue area. Its energy accumulation is quick, but there's the drawback of major pressure points worsening due to accumulating other impure energy. Shin Won abruptly put the book down and had the notion that if it is first rank Advan Grey, then it is the highest-ranked martial arts book that has been published up to this point. However, the disadvantages are too great because it is a clever art, therefore. He was wondering about the interior of the library, looking for a book that could be of assistance to him. He reasoned that there was a good chance that he would deteriorate into an unstable state if he amassed his inner Kai. By the use of a crafty or diabolical art, he needs to become skilled in a high-ranking martial art that has the most consistent and unadulterated Kai. However, if he had accumulated a greater quantity of yin mana, then it would have refused him a lesser amount, and it is currently resisting his inner Kai with all of its might in order to avoid being consumed by it. He is perplexed as to why there aren't any creatures falling from the sky. It had been 8 hours since Shin Won entered the library, and he was still there reading a book. According to the hologram, the art of Unbreakable Heart is of a first-rank, exceptional grade, and it is a form of art that was combined with martial arts by Ichwang Yacho, also known as the Unbreakable Fist. Ichwang Yacho was a martial artist who was trained at the Shayin Temple. Its energy is pure, just like the martial arts, practiced in the Shayin Monastery. Yet there is a danger involved in releasing energy because it is a combination of 2 different styles of martial arts. The hologram inquires as to whether or not he is interested in studying the art of Unbreakable Heart. But Shin Won has no other option because that is the only form of martial art that is considered to be of a higher grade. However, Shin W heard a bumping sound coming from the direction of the wall as he was seated on the floor. He jumped up to investigate the source of the noise and spotted a little girl walking forward while lugging a number of books in a box. The young girl's mouth sprang open and her eyes widened in shock when she realized that she had accidentally run into Shin Won. She quickly expressed her regret while fighting back the tears that threatened to form in response to the anxiety that she was experiencing. Shin W approached the young girl and inquired about the books that she was carrying about. While pointing at it, the little girl said that the books are the damaged books that they got as extras for purchasing other martial arts. She was surprised when Shin W and instructed her to lead him to the place where she gathered all those books. However, the girl was sitting and watching Shin W reading, thinking the latter was weird, since it always sigh after reading books, that she gave when Shin W asked for another book. She asked him if it was okay to learn those kinds of things. In response, Shin W asked the little girl if she was worried about him. He instructed the little girl to try her best and picked one out. And if she picked a good book, he would buy some snack. But he can't recall the name of the little girl and ask what it is in addition. The little girl was delighted after hearing Shin Won. That's why she introduced her name as Dan. So Yon, she parted ways with Shin Won in order to search for an interesting book. And a minute later, she returned with the book and handed it to him. Shin Won grabbed the book in his hands and remarked that it is an older and more worn-out book, when Shin W unexpectedly caressed her head and informed her that she has worked so hard and late because of him. So Yon was perplexed. Shin W also told her that she can buy as many snacks as she likes because she has worked so hard because of him. The delight that So Yon was feeling regarding the sweets that Shin Won had purchased for her was evident in the twinkle that appeared in her eyes. Afterwards, Shin Won came back to his room and tried to practice the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage. It was a martial art made by an unknown man who focused on the harmony of all creation. It has the power to encompass and embrace any energy, and its destructive power is very lacking because it was not made for combat. The Kai release section is not included due to the damages done to the later chapter, and there could be problems when trying to learn it because it is incomplete and damaged. Martial art books, on the other hand, Shin Wan was working hard and breaking a sweat because he was trying the art of the Eastern Shining Sage, encompassed and embraced everything, regardless of whether the item was rare or was trash in any event. But he has a counter-argument, which is that there might be a significant obstacle in the way, and so he is concentrating because there is a good possibility that it has a secret component and he has to find a way to lock it down. He was having such a hard time that he wrinkled his forehead and gritted his teeth. As he struggled, he believed that the absence of destructive force could be compensated for within mana, and that the release of Kai could be accomplished with the mana library. However, there is no middle ground when it comes to yin mana, and he may have been able to combine the two when he reached the third circle of mana. He needs to collect more yin mana, so thank God he can take a break in the middle of it, even if it could potentially take longer time. During his relaxation, he was startled when he detected something behind him, and he was even more startled when he saw a greenish energy moving toward him, because the emerald light appeared to be permeating his entire body. His eyes widened in an expression that suggested he was afraid. He was perplexed as the energy flooded his body and flowed into his entire body instantaneously, and he was unable to stop it even though all of his mana circuits were wide open. On the other hand, the hologram alerted him to the situation and claimed that the curse of death had been placed on him by unknown being. It was an irresistible energy of death that started to encircle his entire body. It was beginning to consume him. Shin Wan was irritated, but then all of a sudden he thought about Jinsang. Jinsang was the only one who would want Shin Wound, with such a high level of death energy that world was not restricted to solely martial arts, and the curse is more closely related to the hunter's power in his former life. Hence, it is not surprising that the physician in his prior world was unable to figure it out. Afterwards, when Shin Woon understood that the energy of death was a coincidence with a great fortune, he broke out laughing and was overjoyed. This was because the energy loaded with the power of death was a blessing for him, rather than a curse for a necromancer like him. In addition to that, it possesses a sufficient amount of mana to fill the mana heart capacity of the second circle. If the bowl is small, you can just overflow it, he added. It appears that faction leader Quack is performing some sort of rite in front of the mummy. Alongside one of his subordinates, he was appreciative of the fact that Jin Sang's subordinates had sent a death curse, which resulted in a significant amount of yin being absorbed. On the other hand, for a necromancer like Shin Wan, being cursed is similar to being baptized. He wasn't going to let all of that unused mana go to waste, that was for sure. After achieving success in completing all 3 Mona Library circles, you will receive an appropriate rank increase as well as new abilities that correspond to the completed circles. However, Shin Wan had around the same level as a hunter with a B rating. The hologram revealed that the rank of his Yin Mana heart had increased to C+, that the Yin Mana heart that stacked Act Yin Mana had reached 3 circles, and that his talent as necromancy had reached rank C+, due to the fact that all necromancy talents received mastery points as a result of his skills. Skeleton Mastery having reached its highest possible level of mastery, the Skeleton Monk and the Skeleton Lancer are now available to be summoned. Shine One, on the other hand, was taken aback by the rapid rate of growth, as well as the fact that this life is superior to the one he lived before. But he doesn't want to stop there because he wants to experiment with something while he's still holding the mana library in his stomach and heart. In addition, he stated that an increase in yin mana is making it simpler to accept the Sage Kai, and that the art of flowing cloud is also fusing with it as a result of this when. The hologram revealed that the rank of the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage had been decided. He was taken aback. The holographic also revealed that the rank is too high for the tier peak as a result of Shin W's successful recreation of the severing art of the Eastern Dazzling Sage. He was graded when the hologram also informed him that his level had increased to level 15. He couldn't contain his joy at the news. He now possesses new abilities, including the Shadow Whisper Mystery, the Hen Rot, and the Bone Wall, which he recently acquired. Additionally, the hologram included information regarding the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage, also known as the Flowing Down Cloud. It is a form of martial art that was developed with the idea that everything in the universe flows together through the changes made by Yinon. It has the ability to calm and combine all types of Kai. Both its destructive power and its capacity to eject Ya have been increased in terms of its power and independence. It is currently comparable to a typhoon. The acceptance ability can absorb any form of power, while the cleansing ability can cleanse any kind of power. Nevertheless, the powers are contingent upon the user's level of martial accomplishment. However, as a result of Shinwun's enjoyment of the descending cloud, his frame advances 2 ranks, moving from Ed Toy. However, he remained clear as to the nature of the inherent ability that was depicted on the hologram. When the light first entered Shinwun's chamber, he didn't realize that the sun had already risen so. He stood up and stretched his body. Even though he stayed up the whole night, he feels like he has had a good night's sleep on the other hand. Sam was running in his direction while calling at him to see if he was awake when Sam informed Shinwon that he needed to go down because someone had come to visit him. Shin W was taken aback by the information. It didn't dawn on him that he had a visitor until the visitor made it very obvious that it was he whom the visitor was looking for when he heard. Another piece of information that threw him for a loop when Sam told him that his guest was his fiancée. Meanwhile, there have been rumblings that a carriage has made its way to the White Cloud faction. The first guard approached the second guard and asked him whether or not the cart in front of them belonged to the GM family. The second guard replied that he had never heard that the GM family was coming and that he had never seen the GM family before. In addition to that, the person who was driving the carriage reported to his master that they had already arrived at the White Cloud faction. As soon as the lady disembarked from the carriage, all of the personnel promptly fell in line in order to greet her. It was White Blossom GM, my ho. However, people take note of her arrival and immediately begin inquiring among themselves about who the lady was. People are staring at her and gushing about how beautiful she is as she walks. People begin to congregate in a spot where they can see my ho, and some of them remark that she has the appearance of an angel. Others say that she is beautiful, a person who is in front of a crowd of people. Gathering, yelling for them not to push, is ignored by those individuals, which leads to his falling to the ground, and his face making contact with the mud. When he lifted his head, he was gasping for air. But as soon as he opened his eyes, he was shocked and horrified when he discovered that one of my ho's subordinates, who has a huge body, was furious at him because the hem of my ho's clothes was full with mud that flowed from his face. The person apologized in a hasty manner, despite the fact that he had not done it on purpose. Mayo's subordinate attempted to approach the individual, but my ho stopped him and, instead, abruptly stepped up to the individual, inquired if he was okay, and even handed the individual some medication to treat his injuries. On the other hand, people were taken aback by her generosity due to the fact that the rare flower that belongs to the GM family also possesses a lovely personality. Others have made the observation that beautiful thoughts are associated with beautiful individuals. Manhwa is shown to be annoyed and has furrowed her brows after hearing everything that was said. Meanwhile, within the White Cloud faction Blue Cloud, Building Jin Sang was focusing his attention on one particular chair. He had nothing to do, and was thinking that if it weren't for Shin Won, that chair would have been his all along. He wonders to himself why the man in front of him he'd held so high, and he wonders if the man is aware that his father is still alive. He was referring to Du Jenu, leader of the White Cloud faction, and White Beauty Blade was the second gentleman seated in front of Jin Sak. He was taken aback when someone called him, and it turned out to be the clear cloud leader for the White Cloud faction. He explained to Jenu that the reason for their late arrival was because his son was a little slow to get up. When his father blamed him for being late, his son, who is positioned in his back, became furious because it was actually his father's fault, because he got home late. However, this causes his father to get irate, and he gives him the order to present himself at Janyu. His son was the vice leader of the Clear Cloud. No-go, he did it in a rather abrupt manner and bowed to greet Jinu. Afterwards, while Jinu and Noi were having a conversation, Jin Sang was irritated when he saw that Noi first greeted Jinu, not him, and didn't notice. He told himself that Noah was the person who isn't swayed by a woman money or even martial arts, because clear clouds only follow those stronger than them. Jin Sang furrowed his brow. While looking at the two men, they had no choice but to come under him when he killed Shin W and became the lord of the place. However, a man took note of the fact that Jin Sang was already present and remarked that he seemed to be someone who was destined to become the person who would raise the White Cloud fraction to its highest point. The man's name was Mo Gil, and he served as the small cloud leader for the White Cloud faction. Additionally, it would appear that every member of the faction is present, which is why the man standing next to Jin Sang stated that they need to get the meeting started before their visitors come. Janu, however, was against it due to the fact that their first master had not yet come. On the other side, Gil suddenly laughed and told Jinu that it was okay to start, since the first master was either not feeling well or as if he would come to join the meeting. However, to everyone's amazement, the men inside the room widened their eyes when they saw Shinwon go through the door, indicating that they thought he was going to attend the meeting, so he came. Uttered Jin Sang, who was clenching his teeth and furrowed his brow out of annoyance that he felt for Shin Won. Sam was taken by surprise when Shin Won grabbed him by the wrist and pulled him inside the room, where all of the faction leaders were gathered. Since Sam was merely a servant, he had no idea what to do or how he should react to the situation. He was sitting in the chair. He was going to ask his master a question, but his master cut him off and told him to remain seated instead. On the other hand, Gil was incensed and demanded that Shin W allow a servant to take a seat in the assembly room of the Blue Cloud side, stating that he had never seen anything like it in all of history. Sam, who was shaking with fright, looked to his master for assistance in an instant, but his master disregarded him. Shinwon, on the other hand, asks Gil to stop and wonders aloud what the problem could possibly be if a servant sat with them. "I told you, why are you allowing dirty servant sits with us?" exclaimed Gil. Shin Woon's irritation increased, and he yelled at Gil, telling him to pay close attention, as he explained that Sam was his underling before he became a servant. Sam, who was sitting next to him and listening to what was going on, was perplexed and didn't know what to do afterwards. Shin Won unleashed a power and intently glanced at Gil at the very moment that Gil was ready to say something. As a consequence, Gil broke out in a cold sweat and was horrified when he saw Woon's face. In addition to this, Gil wonders what sort of appearance Wound has, or whether or not this wound is the same wound that he used to know after that. Everyone's attention is drawn to Wound's direction, and they appear perplexed when he asks Gil if he needs any permission from him so that Sam can sit with him. Will not fix his gaze attentively on Gil in a manner that suggests a desire to frighten the latter. Gil instantly bent his head and murmured in a shaky voice that there would be no problem if one requested that Sam would sit beside him. He continued by saying that if one wished that Sam would sit beside him, there would be no difficulty. Jin Sang interfered and said it was fine because it would be just that moment Sam was going to sit beside Wound, since his older brother is still a bit ill. That's why he needs a servant on his side. Gil abruptly said that Jin Sang was right and praised the lad for his astounding kindness. However, Quack suddenly says that it seems that things have been settled. They have to start the meeting. Quack looks at one and seems to be observing him, but the latter notices it. In addition, as they all know, GM family has visited the palace unexpectedly, and they are expecting two objectives first. They wish to end the scheduled commissions. What reason do they have to end the commissions that have lasted for 10 years? Exclaimed No D. That's why Quack explained to them that the GM family has been complaining about their workers and their attitudes, but he doesn't think that the White Cloud faction was making mistakes and believes that there is an ulterior motive. No, he abruptly asks what kind. But Genu remains silent and thinks about the situation. On the other hand, Gil reveals to them that in accordance with the information provided by their source, the head of the GM family regularly confers with members of the Huang Rock clan. However, Kang suddenly let out a sigh of irritation as a result of the annoyance he felt because of Quack and Gil could just tell the facts, and they are discussing the White Cloud faction, whose true objective was to bring down Genu. In addition to this, Noi was so enraged that he sprang up unexpectedly and slammed the table, and he screams that he doesn't understand why, out of all the commissioners, they go to Huang Rock. Afterward, they all turn their attention to the door, when someone from the outside announces that GM Mayo from the GM family is entering. When the door opened, Maiho abruptly bowed to greet the men within. Shin Wun and Genu was just looking at Maiho and seemed annoyed. Genu assumed that the custom is to leave the guards outside, and she plainly showed that Mayo didn't trust them. Nothing much changes, although you have become more beautiful, uttered Jin Sang. Mayo suddenly blushed when she heard the words of Jin Sang. However, No D made the observation that it appears Mai Ho and her subordinates are rather impatient because they sent them a tea to the waiting room before they came, before the tea had a chance to cool down. The big man was one of Mai Ho's subordinates, and he immediately laughed and scratched his head. He apologized, stating that the waiting room was too small for him to wait in. He also asked for permission to get right to the point regarding the reason for their unexpected visit, in order to save time, because it appeared as though they were all very busy people. As soon as Jianyu gave him permission to speak, the big man quickly apologized and informed Jianyu that from this point on the GM family will cut any ties with the White Cloud faction. "Cut ties with us, you can't just notify us like this one," excitedly exclaimed No. D, the big man, explained that the head of the family had told him that an organization without an owner is destined to fail, so he couldn't understand how they could have let such a place handle their commission. Jin Sang let out a quick sigh, and it appeared as though he was getting frustrated. He then asked the family head if his ideas were definitive as. A response, the big man explained that if the problem that he described will be fixed, perhaps the family of GM would change his mind, because they do have that bond from all of those years of cooperating, so they will allow the faction's leader a half a month or leeway to decide. However, Jinu furrowed his brow and thought deeply. He told himself that it was it. The abrupt visit and the pressure on us in a rude request to choose a leader of their clan. In just half a month, he was looking intently at Jin Sang. He assumed that a deal with the latter and the head of the GM family was made for sure. Or moreover, according to the big man, the engagement between Shinwan and Mail. However, because Shin W cut him off, that's why he is unable to continue his sentence. But before Shin Wun could tell what was in his mind, he heard Jin Sang's thoughts calling him an idiot. And according to the former, he can't forget his first love, which refers to Maiho, even after nearly dying. On the other hand, Maiho was perplexed, and she looked at Shin W as though she wanted to know what was on his mind with regard to their engagement. When Shin W made the announcement that he wished his engagement with Maiho to be called off, every one of the leaders of the various factions, including Sam and Maiho, were taken back and perplexed by his statement. Kang had already seen Manhwa before the GM family arrived in the Blue Cloud Hall, and the moment he did, his head began to hurt in the same way as it had when he had met Janang. However, he was able to tolerate the pain by drawing in and circulating the weaker yin mana. At the same time, he heard someone's voice echoing in his brain. Then all of a sudden, he saw the memory of Shin W from the time that Manhwa introduced herself to him. For the first time, Manhwa expresses her joy at seeing Shin 1, and the two of them discuss how much they love each other and their engagement. But that was only Manhwa's outward demeanor. Because she was concealing a negative attitude on the inside, she was criticizing Shin 1 by saying that she would not marry Shin 1, who, in her opinion, resembles a pig if he were not an heir to the Beacon clan. When they were outside, Manhwa also instructed Shin Wound to act as if she did not recognize her, so that Manhwa would not kill Shin 1 on the spot if he revealed that she knew her. Shin 1 also witnessed Jin Sang and Manhwa engaging in sexual activity. MHO was a repulsive lady who covered her actual personality behind a facade. But Kang was thrown for a loop when he was confronted with yet another memory of Shin Woan. A vile woman could be heard ranting about how those despicable peasants took their own lives because they were unhappy, and how those peasants should have thanked the woman for passing away instead. It appears that she was arrested for something because she was led out by 2 security officers. Regarding the recollection that kept popping up in Kang's head, he was bewildered. He convinced himself that it was not a recollection and reason, that it must have been a memory of the future from a period of time that had already transpired. However, he had no idea how the recollection of the future that he hadn't yet experienced got into his head. He hadn't lived through it yet. Was it Shin W's fate to regain consciousness? He starts to wonder what it was that Shin 1 was keeping to himself. If he gains a few more levels, he will be able to learn the talents that can uncover deeper memories, and by the time he does, he will undoubtedly be completely knowledgeable about everything. Meanwhile, when Shin Woon declared that he wished to call off his engagement to Manhwa, everyone's jaws dropped and they were taken aback. Manhwa bent her head because she was embarrassed by the fact that Shin W does not want to interact with her, despite the fact that everyone adores. Her Shin W inquired of Manhwa once again because the latter was avoiding her questions. "Do you have some lingering attachments towards me?" he added. Because Shin 1 had the audacity to offend their young lady, the big man became outraged at Shin 1. Noi also became enraged and issued a command to the big man, telling him to mind what he said while he was conversing with their young master, despite the fact that the entire room was in disarray. Shin 1 maintained his composure and scratched his head. He stated that it appeared as though they were intending to ask about the engagement to him as well, so he questioned what appears to be the issue if he first breaks off the engagement. "How dare you think of those words that you can," yells of the big man. His vein can be seen on his head due to the annoyance that he felt because they were in trouble. If word got around that their lady got rejected by that pig, then the family leader would have his head. On the other hand, Jin Sang and Manhwa were surprised and irritated when Shin 1 calmly stated that the people concerned would know more about the disengagement. Afterwards, after what the big man heard, he claimed that he cannot overlook Shin 1 for insulting their young lady, and released a force against Shin 1. But to his amazement, Sam was struggling under the force that he had released, while Shin 1 appeared unaffected and maintained his composure throughout. He was perplexed because Shin 1, who is completely ignorant of martial arts, is reverting back to the energy he possessed when he was at the pinnacle of his career as a martial artist, while at the same time maintaining his composure and not collapsing flat on his back or wetting his pants. The big man couldn't believe what he was seeing, so he unleashed all of his might in the belief that Shin Woon was most likely fighting through the pain with everything he had. On the other hand, Jinu takes note of the Ina that the big man discharges, and he was still a black bear, so he asked the black bear if he should take it as a declaration of war from the GM family. And if that's the case, he informed Black Bear that he was ready to fight right then and there. A whiteness that appears in his eyes is accompanied with the discharge of power. However, Black Bear quickly cursed, because despite Jinu's advanced age, his skill hasn't diminished, and it's still far too risky to ridicule the entirety of the Beacon clan. Therefore, the Black Bear decided to stop releasing energy and stated that they will not be expressing their complaints to the rest of the Beacon clan. They only wish to exact revenge on Shin One for the insult directed at my hull. However, Jinyu was irritated and thought that it was foolish due to the fact that any complaints against their young master were complaints against the Beyond clan as a whole. Afterwards, Jin Sang interjected himself and explained that it was a complicated matter and that they can't take responsibility for the choices that his older brother had taken without first addressing it with the leaders of the faction. However, it was difficult to prevent the GM family from defending my ho's dignity and reputation. He wants them to give some thought to the nature of the relationship that exists between the Beyond family and the June family over the long term, and he advises that they settle the dispute by having a duel between the two families. Jin Sang believed that even if there is a regrettable accident, it is the perfect plan to explain that it was a mistake. On the other hand, when Noe and Jinu heard about the duel, their eyes opened and they made a frowning expression with their brows. On the other hand, the Black Bear gave some thought to backing out of the duel before ultimately deciding to continue with it. But Sam immediately stepped up and reminded them that duels make no sense for someone like his master who has no training in martial arts. He explained his reasoning by saying that they are a waste of time. Even Jinu and Noi were against the duel and declared that it was impossible for Shin Won to win because he knows nothing about martial arts. Jin Sang, on the other hand, was quite confident in his chances of victory. The young master is teased by the Black Bear, who forms a grin on his face and suggests that the young master is going to be a coward if he steps back from the responsibilities. He also mentioned that if Shin Won was a little nervous, he should try begging on his knees in front of their young lady, and because their young lady has a kind heart, she would forgive him. He stated that even if Shin Won was a little worried, he should do it. But Jin Sang couldn't help but laugh since he knew it was the end for Shin Won. However, both Sam and Jinu were taken aback when Shin Won abruptly rose up, turned around, and left the building despite the fact that Sam and Noi were attempting to prevent him from doing so. Shin Won abruptly halted when he was in front of the GM family, but he disregarded them and continued to walk outside. As a consequence, the GM family was surprised when they observed that Shin Won did not pay attention towards them. Everyone follows Shin W outdoors and watches as he performs some stretching exercises. Shin W, however, was irritated by the fact that they continued to chatter on and on without stopping. They were perplexed, since they were aware that Shin Won did not have any prior experience with martial arts, hence they were at a loss for words when Shin Won abruptly turned around and announced that he will fight against the Black Bear. A man was calmly sharpening his blade when he noticed other people make their way towards something. He yelled out to someone who was walking by, "Why is everyone in such a hurry?" Someone has apparently informed the man that there is a duel going on, and it appears like their master and the GM family are going at it. When the man heard that their master was heading into conflict, he couldn't believe what he was hearing, because everyone knows that their master has unlocked a wealth of knowledge in martial arts. However, a large number of individuals were congregating at the gym that belonged to the Beacon clan. Noi and his son were worried about their master and urged Jinu to stop the battle because their master may get gravely harmed. And there is no way that the GM family had assigned to Maio are ordinary men, but why did Mr. Il Gongya, if it's not a heartbreak, he can't be utter no D? However, Jinu revealed to them that he wished to put an end to the duel, but that there was nothing that could be done about it at this point. He also warned them that if he interfered with the combat, all of the members' hearts would turn away from the first master. Nodi furrowed his brow and persuaded himself that the Vice Lord's remarks were correct. He reasoned that a person who betrays the faith of his followers cannot ascend to the position of the monarch, and that fleeing the duel would be the same as abdicating his position as lord. On the other side, Jinu was irate, since it was not a circumstance in which they could simply wait and watch what happened, and this made her upset. If their first master is in danger, he will seek assistance, so Noi does not need to be concerned in any way. But Noi was perplexed, since no one is permitted to interfere until it is determined for certain how the winter would play out. They will turn to their Vice Lord for assistance in the event that anything UNT occurs with their first master, despite the fact that this will bring his reputation into disrepute. In addition, Kang seemed bored, yet he was paying attention to every word that Noi and Jinu said. On his side was his servant, who begged him to back out of the duel, because there is no logical reason for a duel to take place. On the other hand, the big man turned his attention to Kang and inquired as to whether or not he was prepared to begin. Mayo acts as if she's about to pass out and makes a scared face when Kang suddenly walks through the stage. This causes Mayo to give the impression that she is losing consciousness. A servant was attempting to calm her, assuring her that the situation was not her fault, and that her outward appearance did not compare to the beauty of her inner self. When Mayo was told by that, her acting ability was amazing, and that she would be a perfect fit for an opera. She immediately covered her face and furrowed her forehead in anger. As a direct consequence of this, all of my Ho's staff became enraged with him, including the big man who was yelling at him and demanding to know how much longer he would continue talking about their young lady. On the other hand, Jinmu explained to the Black Bear that the use of inner Kai in the duel is not permitted because Confucius was not a morum, and the rules of the duel prevent it. The Black Bear was angry with Jinu because he believed that they did not know the rule, which is why he told them that there was no need to worry about it. After then, the Black Bear directs his attention to his subordinates and inquires among them as to who is interested in receiving instruction from the first master. His subordinates, all of a sudden, raised their hands and began clamoring for him to call their names, because they believed that if Maiho took notice of them, it would be the best thing for their careers. But because there were a lot of people willing to help, Black Bear had a difficult time choosing after some time. He chose OD, Daling to face off against Shin 1. In a duel, Sing is cautioned by the Black Bear not to use his inner Kai and to focus only on the threat. Sing, who had a grin on his face and appeared pleased to overcome Shin, Wu muttered, "Do I have any choice?" uttering, who had a grin on his face and seemed excited to defeat Shin W. However, Black Bear was perplexed when Kang asked him what he was doing because Kang intended for the duel to be fought between Black Bear and Kang himself and not with some subordinate. Sam Jinujin sang and Noi together with his son were all unable to find the words to express themselves, and as a consequence of this, the Black Bear grew furious, as evidenced by the widening of his eyes and the clenching of his jaws. He claimed that Kang would have to deal with his subordinates first if he chose to fight an opponent with an excessively large power gap between them. This would result in condemnation from the rest of the world. Kang was too obstinate in his assertion that Black Bear was his adversary and not some subordinate, and he even insulted Black Bear about the power disparity between them, claiming that Black Bear was not that strong. However, a referee steps in to break up the fight and start the duel, because if he doesn't, there will be a significant issue if he just lets them go at it on their own. Duel starts, he added Kang, and Sing had already taken the stage, and Sing appeared to be warming up with some stretching. Black Bear communicated with him through his head and advised him that he would take care of everything afterwards, but that he should not hold back and instead completely crush his opponent. Sing's response was that he was going to break a couple portions of his body then, without warning, he takes his position while he grins at Kang. He jumped out of nowhere and was about to give Kang a punch. But Kang dearly avoided his blow, and the attack was for naught. He then jumped again. As Jinu and the black bear watched Kang's every move, they couldn't believe their eyes. Kang receives a rapid punch from Sing, but the latter is just as quick on his feet as Sing. Black Bear observes that Sing is playing by his opponent, and as a result he yells at him to perform the move in the correct manner. When those who are watching the battle discover that Sing is employing an inner Kai known as the Ghost Wolf Fist, they become incensed because he used martial arts against regular people. People look down on him and call him names like bastard and coward. However, Sing chooses to disregard them because he is aware that even if he were to strike Kang, the plan would not be successful. Kang, on the other hand, became aware that he was close to the edge of the stage, and he questioned whether Sing had cornered him on purpose. Sing was already moving closer to Kang, and he was getting ready to punch Kang with his fists. "I will make you vomit everything you've eaten," utters Sing, who seems annoyed at K. On the other hand, both Jinu and No were concerned about Kang because of the precarious situation in which he found himself, with Kang standing on the edge of the platform while his opponent approached. The black bear witnessed everything, and it made the black bear very happy when Sing delivered a powerful punch to Kang's gut. When he observed how Sing was hurting for his hands, which were suddenly bleeding, his elation quickly faded and was replaced with surprise. At the same time, his mouth fell when he noticed how Sing's eyes were widening, because the latter couldn't believe what happened. On the other hand, the three of them, Jin, Sang, Gil, and Quack, were completely perplexed. They could not comprehend how it had taken place. He inquires of Gil whether or not he believes Shin wound cinched his abdominal area with steel plates or steel armor. But that can't be right, because he didn't notice anything odd while he was on the road. However, Quack claimed that Shin Won was employing an external art. In addition, Jin Sang was perplexed, since he did not understand how Shin Wu could master external arts. Afterwards, Black Bear was irate and yelled at Shin Wu. He also called the latter a coward, due to the fact that Shin W uses external art. However, Shin W abruptly switched his attention to him and appeared perplexed by the exterior skills that Black Bear had stated. On the other hand, the people were shouting at the Black Bear, which caused mayhem. They defend their master when Black Bear says that he is a coward for utilizing external art, despite the fact that they are the first ones to utilize Ma arts and even use inner Kai. This is why they wanted Black Bear to retract what he said about their master. And as a consequence of this, Black Bear is left with no other option but to accept their defeat in the first round. This is because if he did not do this, people would attack them, given that they are in the territory of the Beyond. However, Kang scoffs at their lack of understanding because he was not utilizing any form of external art to defend himself. Rather, he was using bone armor, which was producing the desired results, according to the hologram. The bone armor is a monster bone that has been fashioned into a formidable armor. It is possible to summon it and wrap it around yourself to provide additional defense against physical assaults. On the other hand, despite Shin Woon's victory in the fight was seen, the duel has not yet come to an end. After everything that Shin W said to their young lady, it was now Black Bear's turn to come toward the stage. Black Bear was incensed by what Shin W had said to their young lady. On the other hand, Jinu became furious when he observed that the Black Bear would be Shin Woon's subsequent opponent in battle. He gritted his teeth and asked the Black Bear whether he had lost his mind for sparring an average person against him who was a skilled martial artist. Black Bear argues that the circumstances altered due to the fact that body martial arts are still considered to be a type of martial art. He didn't think there would be any other problems with battling Shin Wan, now that they all knew that the first master is now just a regular person who is skilled in martial arts. He didn't think there would be any other problems on the other hand. Jinu and Noai were irate at him for being so unreasonable, and they expressed their anger toward him by saying so. However, Kang interrupts them and orders them to cease what they are doing. Kang calls Black Bear a teddy bear for talking too much more than a man would do. He ordered him to get up on the stage to start the duel. Kang and Black Bear were now facing each other at a duel. Black Bear told Kang that he will regret everything while clenching his fists. But Kang was so calm. You don't see that he was scared of his opponent. For some reason, everyone that say that always loses utter king, but Black Bear became furious for him. Kang was so arrogant after only winning with a few tricks. However, Kang observes that Black Bear seems so confident in his physical martial arts, but it's a simple task to break. Just requires a stronger power, but Kang will break it. Afterwards, Black Bear takes a position and suddenly punches Kang in the face, but Kang is able to avoid the blow and watches every move, allowing him to prevail over the Black Bear's attack. Kang had little trouble prevailing over Seeing in their battle, even though the Black Bear was quick. Kang takes precautions to protect himself from any attack. But while Black Bear was using all of his strength on his final strike, Kang dodged it once more, and as a result, his adversary lost his footing and fell to the ground. But all of a sudden he stood up and kicked Kang, and the immense force that he unleashed on Kang caused the light to materialize due to the impact of his kick. Black Bear was under the impression that he had struck Kang, therefore he was taken aback when he saw the latter suddenly raise his arms above his head in an effort to prevent any fatalities as a result of his assault. Even though Black Bear's attack was speedy, his opponent moved more quickly to escape his assault, and Black Bear had the unexpected notion that Kang seemed to be using a trick. He was upset because he couldn't hit Kang despite the fact that his blow was swift. However, Kang observed that Black Bear was a bit different from his previous adversary due to the rapidity of his motion on the other hand. Many people who were observing them were uncertain as to whether or not Black Bear was truly one of the most advanced martial arts. Other people have noted that they are dissatisfied with the duel since Black Bear was unable to overcome their master, who lacks knowledge in martial arts. Other people have commented that they believe the GM family will give the seat to anyone who asks for it in addition. The attacks and dodging that Black Bear and Kang are currently engaging, and during their combat, appear to have already irritated Black Bear. As a result, he hastily went toward Kang and raised his one arm in an attempt to strike, but it turned out to be a poor move for him and an opportunity for Kang, who swiftly used the yin mana, put the force on his fist, and then abruptly blew it in his face. This gave Kang the upper hand. As a consequence of this, the Black Bear was dragged outside and tumbled around on the ground. After the event, everyone was ecstatic and shouting their congratulations for their victory. However, when a Black Bear suddenly stood up and enlarged his eyes, he saw that people were cheering for their master's victory. Because of this, he approached Kang unexpectedly and applied a force to his body while gazing at Kang, who was staring at him. A light suddenly appeared on the stage. Just as the man was going to punch Kang, everyone was blinded by the light, including Mai Ho, who instinctively covered her face in response. However, when Mai Ho opened her eyes, she was taken back to discover that Shin Wan's opponent was floating in the air and heading in the direction of where she was standing. She takes a quick move to the side in order to dodge the Black Bear on the other hand. Jinu had already made his way onto the stage in an attempt to conceal Kang, and it was his sword that was responsible for the unexpected appearance of light. Everyone was taken aback, including the Black Bear that had not moved from its position on the ground. "What are you doing? Your master has been attacked." White Cloud faction raise your blade, yells of Jinu. To provide adequate defense for their first master, each member of the faction has already converged on him and surround him. Even Noi gave the command for the Clean Cloud to surround their adversary. Moreover, Black Bear and their subordinates were quaking in fright because they believed that they would all perish on Bion. Furthermore, some of them cursed their commander for being an imbecile. But Mayo was not afraid. Rather, she was outraged. And everyone was taken aback when she suddenly erupted in anger and her face transformed. My ho's face changed as she erupted in anger. "You bugs! Where do you think you're pointing your swords?" she yells. Swordsmen belonging to the Cloud faction offered their opinions on my ho. Some of them claimed that her eyes could kill a man, but others asserted that her true hue had become apparent. Still others admitted that they feared my ho. My ho-on, on the other hand, is unable to contain her rage and lashes out at Black Bear in retaliation for sullying her honor. She appeared to be so enraged as if she wanted to kill Black Bear. On the other hand, the latter was caught off guard when his young lady suddenly slapped him, however, because they have the right to make him pay the price for attempting to kill their first master. No Deb's Lady Mayo for permission to hand over the Black Bear to them, but he is unable to complete his sentence because something happened, and Black Bear's eyes immediately widened when he saw someone whose sweet lie took his life when a man suddenly arrived out of nowhere. They were all taken aback because the young lady had only to make a single and signal, and the man would kill for her. This should be enough, I presume, utter the man while blood of Ding was on his face and body. Furthermore, when No noticed that the other person was using a horrifying blood claw, he was taken aback even. The swordsmen that were surrounding Shin Won were astounded when they heard that he was Gamin, also known as the horrifying blood claw, and that he was the most powerful member of the GM family. Jinu, on the other hand, creased his forehead in concentration. He was under the impression that his level of martial achievement was somewhere near the apex of the middle tier, but it was even too low to compete with. Sing, however, he is unable to pull back, and even if he were to perish, the only thing left for him to accomplish at this point is to safeguard the first master. Therefore, he quickly turned his attention to Shin W and assured him that he would look out for his safety. However, Jinu was taken aback when Kang questioned him who was guarding whom and advised him to care more about himself because Jinu didn't appear to be in particularly good shape. He focused all of his attention on his first master, and as a result, he failed to notice that Sing was looking at both of them at the same time, while licking the claw that was covered in blood, and appeared eager to murder once more. Gunam was hemmed in by No and the other members of his staff. It appeared as though he was getting ready to launch an assault, as a bluish-green energy form began to emanate from him. After that, he asks Noah whether they want to begin a war, and if they want, he doesn't stop them. But Jin Sang cut them off and advised Noi to back off, because there appears to be confusion on both sides of the argument. An's anger grew as he refused to back down and realized that it was inappropriate to dismiss Mai Ho and Gunam from their positions, therefore. Jinang conveyed to Noi in a level-headed manner that the viewpoint of Mai Ho is one that can be understood. Aside from that, there is no point in continuing the fight because the Black Bear's neck has already been severed. But Jin Sang was so anxious that his face was sweating and he clenched his teeth because everything was a mess, and if something happened to Mai Ho or the rest of his subordinate, they may expose the agreement that he had made with the head of the GM family. What part of their position do you understand? Yells no. D, however, all of the leaders and members of the faction shifted their attention to Shin Wan when he ordered them to release their hold on the GM family on the grounds that what had occurred appeared to be sufficient education for them. Shin Wan's decision left No D and Jinu bewildered, while the rest of the people around them were shocked that their master could remain so calm, despite the fact that he was on the verge of death. Others were pleased with their master since something has really changed in him, and others were interested about when he learned to use Kai. On the other hand, Jin Sang was enraged because the one getting the lesson that Shin Wan was talking about was him Do, and he can't forgive him, and the first master heard all his thoughts. However, Shin Wan was surprised when Mayo poked hard and yelled at him. She even said that she will never forget what the first master did, before turning around and leaving. But Shin Wan forms a grin on his face and whisks something. Meanwhile, a discussion is taking place between two groups of men, one of whom is wearing a hat, and the other wearing a mask. The man who was wearing the hat was infuriated, and he asked the man in the mask, who was in charge of the other men, what was going on, since their plan had failed completely. The man who was wearing a mask is a hunchback. He suddenly apologized and stated that who would have imagined the situation would be such a mess. But at least the person who was responsible for all of this is now dead. Jin Sang was the person wearing the hat, and he was taken aback when he asked the hunchback what the plan was, and the hunchback told him that their headmaster had made a decision, and he wanted to pull out their swords if Jin Sang would allow it. Jin Sang was stunned by this information. The hunchback was informed by Jin Sang that they will begin in 7 nights and that he will clear the dogs from the front gate. After that, everyone left the location, but they were unaware that a blue energy was creeping around on the ground. It appeared to be listening to what they were saying, and after that crept around and appeared to be looking for something. However, Sam continues to chatter about the fight that took place some time ago as he is present. In Shinwon's room, Shinwon, however, did not appear to be paying attention to Sam and appeared bored. Shinwon was informed by the latter that the leaders of the Clear Cloud and White Cloud factions are interested in learning when he will visit their respective factions. In addition to this, the vice leader of the Clean Cloud faction, No Jio, requested that he also instruct them. Sam was taken aback when his master called for his attention and informed him that the events that transpired earlier during the combat weren't actually all that risky. He chastised his master and warned that Jinu would have to come to his rescue if things didn't turn out well for him. But Shin Woon abruptly turned around and appeared dejected. He told himself that he could have easily handled that weak strike even if Jinuo hadn't blocked it. Afterwards, Sam abruptly sat down and informed his master that he had no idea how his heart had sunk when his master told him that he would fight a black bear. Tank, on the other hand, Lai covered his nose with his finger, and when he realized that Sam, his brother in blood, had been thinking of stabbing a sword into his heart, instead, his heart sank for Sam. He quickly apologized for the fact that Sam was worried about him. On the other hand, the latter stated that he is unable to apologize to servants such as himself. Shin Woon, however, argued against Sam by stating that he was not merely a servant due to the fact that he was a trustworthy guy. After hearing his master's remarks, Sam immediately felt an overwhelming sense of happiness after that. He rose up because his master might be fatigued and he should relax, so he waved farewell and told him to just call him if he needed anything. Furthermore, when Shin Won was by himself in his room, he put his hand on the window and acted as though he was trying to communicate with someone or something outside it. Was the blue energy it had come through the window and had come to rest on his table. He gives the blue energy the command to reveal what it has observed. After the blue energy moved upward and grew in size, the dialogue between Jin Sang and the hunch materialized in the middle of the room. He reasoned with himself that it was fortunate for him to have a shadow whisper placed on him. Despite this, the shadow whisper has a rank that is a C+, and its mastery level is 8% if he calls forth a showdown parasite, also known as the shadow whisper. The abyss will always watch back. It is able to become attached to the enemy's shadow and report back to its master whatever it has heard and seen. When he learned that in a week Jin Sang would take the guards, while a bunch of assassins would come to assassinate him, he became enraged. He asked himself if he was going to kill his half-brother, but he reasoned that he should not be too reckless because he did not know the power of his adversary. As a result, he decided that he needed to make preparations for 7 days before putting his plan into action. He looks out the window at the moon, and all of a sudden he breaks into a grin, as though he was just thinking about something. Now, shall we get to the grave, he uttered. Kang found himself in the Valley of the Blood Mist. He raises his hand to summon a skeleton lancer, and immediately after, a skeleton materializes in front of him and kneels down. He then made a request for the status window, after which a hologram appeared and informed him that a skeleton lancer was a skillful spearman who was 20 levels high. The ability is a vagabond of the first rank, with a weakness in aiming and a moderate spirituality. It has the skills of 19 young chain strike and lightning bow step, and its inner Kai has been at the level of 1825 for approximately 5 years when Kang studied what was written on the hologram. He was overjoyed to learn that it acknowledged him as a hunter with a high B level. After that, he reversed the process of calling forth the skeletal lancer. He breaks out in a startling grin when he thinks about how quickly he can collect 5 skeletons of the first rank within a single day. Not to mention the effects of all-accepting power and purify from the severing technique of the Eastern Shining Sage is insane. Once more he communicates with the status window, and then appears in the hologram to announce that he has advanced to level 22 and that the level of his inner Kai has increased to 3,360. He was able to acquire the severing art of the Eastern Shining Sage, and he considered this to be an act of divine providence on his part to claim as his own all of the inner Kai that the undead possessed. He begins to wonder if it could be related to the martial frame ability known his natural frame of a sage. All of his other stats, with the exception of magic and knowledge, are above average. He was not subject to any sort of punishment, despite acquiring both the close combat ability and the mage ability. At this rate, he might also be able to master other forms of martial arts in addition to the heart arts. However, it is in his best interest to concentrate on regaining his primary necromancy ability as quickly as possible. He had the intention of going to the graves of the peaked undead, which refers to the undead with the highest rank. So he set out on foot till he reached the grave, when he was taken aback to see that it was somewhat smaller than he had anticipated. He came within a short distance of the grave of Uil Lang, the White Cloud Swordmaster, who was the first leader of the Beyond clan and was known for being the most skilled swordsman in the history of the clan. After that, he placed his palm on the grave and attempted to conjure the spirit of Uil Lang, who had passed away. He believed that undead of the gold rank who had reached their full potential in martial arts would exude a golden glow, but the grave of the greatest martial artist of all time, Master Il Lang, is completely colorless. He wanted to know what Uil Lang had been keeping to himself. Kang utters the phrase, Death Kai extraction. When the process of extracting death came to an end on its own, a light suddenly appeared on the grave and spread throughout the area. Then a hologram appeared, which informed him that his necromancy ability rank was not high enough to carry out the process of extracting Death Kai from the undead, and became even more perplexed when the hologram indicated that the required rank was a question mark. He starts to wonder why a gold rank undead shouldn't be able to be created with a necromancy level of BEI, hypothesizes that this is due to the fact that Yu Lang must have possessed strength greater than that of an accomplished martial art artist. Because of this, he was interested in determining the level of success he had achieved in martial arts while he was still alive. He circled back around and was about to depart, having concluded that his attempt to conjure the spirit of Uil Lang had been unsuccessful. Yet he was so confident that there must be another hidden piece somewhere. However, he is obligated to search to find the grave of another top-tier martial artist, if at all possible. But he cannot continue his thought, because he became aware of something happening behind him. He turned around to see what it was, but his mouth dropped open in shock as he noticed the light emerging from the tomb. He was surprised. It turned out to be a circle for calling forth skeletons. The hologram then emerged and informed him that the undead desired to follow him of their own free will, that he had satisfied the specific condition of being the one who stimulated the attention of the undead, that the temporary rank restriction on the necromancy talent had been removed as a reward, and that other perks had been granted to him as well. Afterwards, it was incomprehensible to him that the undead would want to follow him, and that the undead would of its own will release the rank restriction then. A skeleton materialized out of thin air and took a seat on top of the grave. The hologram also claimed that his necromancy ability rank is significantly lower than the rank of the undead, that his rank is automatically recalibrated and calibrated to gold rank, and that his rank would automatically grow as his necromancy ability rank increases. However, Kang couldn't believe it when he called the status window and stated that the ability and skill of the peak swordsman is all of the peak swordsman and 12 swords of the thunder clouds are at a plus rank and more. Moreover, he suddenly furrows his brow when he notices that the skeleton warrior is walking toward him instead of kneeling for loyalty. He was also surprised as he widened his eyes when the skeleton warrior talked to him through his mind and said that he was an interesting lad. He thought that the emotion of the peak swordsman duel was being sent directly to him, and the means the peak swordsman had chosen him. He was confused and asked himself if he could handle the skeleton, when it suddenly put its hand on his chest. Furthermore, the status window suddenly appeared and began to indicate that the peak swordsman is attempting to transfer the 12 swords of the thundercloud and the art of the lightning thunder god. The decision of whether or not he wishes to take advantage of this ability is being posed via the status window. And the reason why the peak swordsman put its hand on his chest is because it is transferring its talent towards Kang. A smile breaks out on his face as he acknowledges its capacity. Meanwhile, the moon is the only source of light for the large number of people who are frantically racing through the woodland at high speed. The man with the hunchback, who appears to be in charge, gives the order for his subordinates to take a short break. They were taken aback by the suddenness of the event, and as they turned around to look behind them, they saw a woman with a mask who yelled at them and instructed them to run in the appropriate manner. Even worse, the lady kicked one of the lower-level subordinates and cursed at the others. But the hunchback Gunam interrupts and asks the lady whether she was required to follow them. As a reaction, the woman stated that she needed to personally witness his limbs being cut off and beg for his life with her own 2 eyes. The latter believed that the lady was a nasty wench, and that regardless of her knowledge of the demonic art, she would have continued to live her life. After we arrived, do you think Jin sang that Rat would pretend not to know anything asked? The lady Gunam responded by stating that it was not an issue, because he too was in a difficult situation as a direct result of Shin One's achievements. After she called him a maggot and stated that he didn't realize that the black bear had cost him his neck, he suddenly let out a force because he was outraged. He could have gotten into a confrontation with the lady, but instead he instructed her to shut up and get going again so that he could avoid it. When the lady saw that Gome was incensed because she blamed him for what had occurred to the black bear, she abruptly halted when she discovered that Gome was already releasing a power and playing with his claw. We're moving again. Utter Gome, on the other hand, when they were getting ready to go. Everyone was taken aback when they noticed something was coming up behind them, because one of the subordinates believed that it was an ambush. He guarded the lady and put his own body in the way of anything that might have approached, when something suddenly pierced the body of the subordinate. Everyone there was completely taken aback. Gunam noticed it, and his eyes widened as he realized that the object was a bone. He focused his attention to the spot from which the bone had originated. When he saw that a large number of bones were coming towards them and had already slain a couple of his people in a short amount of time, his eyes widened and he furrowed his forehead. When one bone was getting closer to the lady, he used his body as a shield for her, and he used his claw to avoid it when he saw that his subordinates were in disarray and were astonished by the sudden appearance of the bone, and that all of them would be killed if he didn't step up. He commanded the remaining subordinates to wrap their kai around their swords and knock the bone away. He then released a force from within his body. Afterwards, the subordinate of Gunam obeys his command, and they suddenly release their kai to their sword, after which they begin evading every bone that was heading in their direction. Oh, pretty good, Utter King, when he saw what happened. On the other hand, a significant number of Gonnam's subordinates had been killed and others had been injured. It infuriated him that he had yelled at their adversary to come out of the shadows and stop acting like a coward by hiding. So Kang revealed his identity from behind the tree, and he responded to the assassin's accusation that he was a coward by stating that it was absurd to make such a statement while they were on their way to kill. Himgam was perplexed as to how Shin Won could be in this location. He did not know what response to give. On the other hand, Kang asks Ganem why he didn't talk, or whether it's because Ganem believes that he won't be able to recognize them even if they wear a mask. Consequently, he pointed both Ganem and the woman, whose name was White Lily, with his finger. Ganem tells him that it is risky to accuse them of carrying out an assassination, and that the reason they were in that location was because they were carrying out a covert task that had been given to them by the leader of the GM family. Kang abruptly says that their hidden task was to eliminate him, after suddenly forming a grin on his face. White Lily's anger was fueled by the possibility that Jin Sang had betrayed them by informing his half-brother that they intended to kill him as a result. She ordered her subordinates to simply kill Shin Won, on the other hand. Ganem believed that both of the brothers were playing a game of bait with them. Since a large number of bone spears were released all at once, there must be more bone spears with him. When he looks at Shin W, though he is unable to perceive anyone other than himself, he pondered in his head if Shin Won was foolish or stupid for coming all by himself. He came to the conclusion that Shin W had perhaps launched a device, which is excellent news, given that Shin Won had made it simpler for them to eliminate him afterwards. Ganem suddenly opened his arms wide and let forth a burst of energy while he was questioning Shin W about whether or not he didn't want to wait for his death. Yes, this is how this should go, uttered Shin Won. Then a large number of Gam subordinates made a sudden attack on Kang, but he was prepared for it and summoned another set of bone spears, which he then fired towards his adversary. His adversaries were taken back as he once again launched a set of bone spears. When it was already too late for them to evade the attack, since it was too quick for them to avoid being pierced all over their body, however, everyone was taken aback when Shin Won declared that he had not started the process yet. On the other hand, Kang thought that the bone spears consume a lot of mana, so he has to control the usage, but it's not enough to scare them. However, Ganem was sweating and seemed confused and scared. He thought that it was definitely not Shin W using his Kai to move those spears, and there's no way he was a transcended peak martial artist at his age. Therefore, it must be demonic arts. His eyes widened when he realized that the demonic sect might have something to do with the revival of Shin Won. And as a result, he suddenly shout and release a massive force all over his body, and said that it was simply a trick and all they have to do is kill Shin Won. In addition, he thought that because of the trick that Shin Wound might use it, caused some casualties in. They're part, but they are still way more for them, and the numbers of spears flying them has decreased. If they run at him all at once, they can kill him. So, Ganem made the announcement that he would be taking charge of his subordinates and was about to assault, when Shin Won warned him that he was not alone, which caused him to immediately stop Kang raised, his palm in a startlingly rapid motion, and immediately called out his 5 skeleton warriors. When they saw Kang's skeleton soldiers, all of Gum's subordinates were terrified, and some of them even started crying out of sheer terror. They watch as the skeletons emerge from the ground and grasp their weapons in preparation to attack. Now this is demonic arts utter ken. When those 5 skeleton warriors stepped in front of them, the others quickly began praying, and Ganem began to perspire out of dread. The latter believed that he had spent his entire life as a murderer, but his body still froze in dread. Whenever he saw a skeleton, he also asked himself, how could something coming from simple demonic rituals have that strength to summon skeleton warriors? However, the skeleton warriors begin their assault on their opponent. Because of this, God Nam warned his subordinates that whoever turned back would meet their death at his hands. Despite their fear, his subordinates make the decision to fight, leading them to believe they are only a bone, then rush towards the skeleton warrior, who is now approaching them. However, Kang let out a sigh and asked himself if they were all crazy for going through heaven and hell, but they chose to die. The skeleton warrior was on his side, while pointing its bow and arrow at their opponent. Skeleton warriors belonging to Kang were making their way. towards Gum's subordinate. They edged swords to battle against one another in this conflict. One of the people saw an arrow flying towards him, so he slashed it with his sword. However, he did not see another arrow coming towards him, and it struck him in the forehead. As a consequence of this, the guy fell to the ground and was killed. Ganem was there for it all, and it looks like he's afraid because he's sweating. He assured himself that he had already seen those formidable foes defeated by the dark shadow iron chain arrow, which consisted of 2 arrows traveling in the same direction. He can't help but wonder how that skeleton could possibly use the skills of Jed Jang's most accomplished archer. No Juk Moon Gam was unaware of the fact that Uil Lang, the skeleton, was the most strong member of the Beacon clan when he was still alive. In addition, he suddenly realizes that the 19 young chain strike of One Whole Spear Ghost and the Black Tiger Fist of Tiger Iron Fist that the skeleton uses are the skills of Jed Jong's martial artist. He furrowed his brow when he heard one of his subordinates coughing and asking for help. He ignored it and thought that he will put himself in danger if he tried to defeat Shin Woon's subordinate. Then he noticed that the latter was calmly standing and didn't throw any more spears, meaning he was focused on control those skeletons. And that's a chance for him to kill Shin Won. Then he abruptly ran towards the ladder. When Ganem was already quite close to Shin Won, he turned to look to the side and realized that something was approaching. A force that took the appearance of light suddenly erupted towards him. Ganem was alarmed because of this. He came to a sudden halt and discovered that the light was a force that had been created by one of the skeletons who was attempting to protect Shin Won. He was so enraged that he wrinkled his brow and clenched his teeth the entire time. Shin Won and all of the skeletons are making their way toward him. Gam thanked Shin Won for making the last moment of his life enjoyable, and suddenly chuckled before those skeletons took his life. On the other hand, Kang was satisfied, because what occurred was way more than he expected. The Thundercloud 12 sworded using lightning thunder. God Art, its power is unbelievable, and it seems he created a barrier using the Thunderbolt bolt. And from that moment onwards, he can train more seriously in martial arts. Then the hologram stated that a new summonable peak assassin has been added to his stash. That's why Kang was delighted, as he walked to the lady with a mask who happened to be Mayo, who widens her eyes when he sees that Shin Wound was walking towards her and can't escape because her body can't move. On the other hand, Mai-Ho had been restrained by Kang's shadow bind, which is why she was unable to move. Kang removed the mask to expose Mai-Ho's true identity. The latter immediately confesses that she was duped by Jin Sang, and then she cries fake tears as she claims that they are lovers and that they are engaged. Because of this, she insists that she would never harm Shin Won, and she begs him to begin over because it is not yet too late. On the other hand, Kang gave Mai-Ho the order to quit acting because she was so excellent at it, and he questioned whether or not she still kidnapped travelers and tortured them. When Mai-Ho found out that Shin Wound knew such things, she became perplexed and furrowed her brow. As a result, she made the decision to kill Shin Wound. Since she knew that if her secrets were out, her life would be over, she turned on a device that was attached to her fist, and then she suddenly sprayed it on Shin Won while urging him to die right then. She couldn't help but giggle when she saw the bluish smoke strewn around Shin Won, but she was surprised when she realized that she had been mistaken about having defeated Shin Wound, because the latter told him that his poison resistance skill is already at rank B+. Afterwards, Mai-Ho's eyes widened as she saw the blue smoke dissipate over time. Revealing Shin Woon's face, Shin Won had already been pointing his 2 fingers in her direction when he suddenly thrust those fingers into Mayo's chest, which caused Mayo's eyes to widen. Kang, on the other hand, revealed to Mai-Ho that he had slashed her throat in order to prevent her from speaking. Kang also shared with her that one of the things he appreciates most about their world is that he does not have to be concerned with breaking the law when he murders people like her. Mayo was shivering with terror as Kang stimulated the corruption. After that, she went to her knees and tried her best to utter words, but she was unable to do so. Now, however, she was quivering with fear because of shin wound and then collapsed to the ground. Kang had only ever used this ability once before, and that was to dispose of the body of a gigantic creature. He was unaware that it could potentially be useful in this situation. He got down on one knee in front of my hoe, who was trembling so badly that her entire body was quivering. Her eyes widened and her jaw fell. After that, he reached under his garments and pulled out what appeared to be a golden object, which he then tossed at the dead body of my hoe before fleeing the scene. "You're next, you Jin-sang otter." King, couple of days later. Jin-sang was furious and ordered Quack along with his subordinate to explain what happened. But he became enraged when none of them spoke. The subordinate thought that the assassin group sent from GM family never came back, and later, a woman's corpse was found to have decomposed over 10 years. However, Quack thought that upon the discovery of an identity card on the corpse, they believed it was GM Mayo's body. The GM's family leader hasn't regained consciousness since the trauma. On the other hand, Jin-sang furrowed his brow, while bullets of sweat formed on his face. He told himself that they found an identity card on the corpse, and the killer must have planned it. He clenched his teeth when he realized that it might be Shin Woon's warning for him. So he abruptly stood in his chair and instructed Quack and his subordinate to do something about the situation, because if that continues, Jin-sang can't continue his sentence, because Quack interrupted him and said to calm down and no need to worry. Then his eyes suddenly changed, and even his whole face. Then he was instructed by Quack to go to the red light district and drink some alcohol there. On the other hand, after what Quack said, Jin-sang suddenly calmed down as if Quack hypnotized, and he was under some magic. Afterwards, Jin-sang left the two and his faces seemed blank, and the only thing in his mind was Quack's order. A subordinate of Quack suddenly lets out a sigh and exclaims that he cannot believe that everything could become so complicated due to Shin Woon's actions alone. But the subordinate was perplexed when Quack told him that a noted up-up string may be easily taken off. So Quack explained to him that if a bug became an impediment to the grand plan of their sect, then they had no choice but to exterminate it, even if it meant torching the entire house. The subordinate then grinned from ear to ear and thought to himself that the Beacon clan would soon be covered in blood as soon as it was possible. In addition, Quack issued an order to his subordinate, telling him to get ready for a holy battle with the White Blood Auras Underground. He said this because the White Blood Auras Underground will start the executions as soon as the day has begun. He also instructed his subordinate to enhance the intensity of the curse placed on Shin Wound and make it as severe as possible, because he didn't notice that it didn't harm him, and it appears that Shin Wound has developed a resistance to the curse. "Yes, sir," uttered the subordinate. On the other hand, when Sam informed the people that it was impossible for them to meet his lord, it caused commotion among the people. People, however, continue to assert that even for a few moments they desired to communicate with Shin Won, or pass him a letter for the purpose of Sam being able to deliver it to Shin Won. They were all begging Sam to save them and appeared to be in fear. But Sam told them that his young master instructed him that he will not meet anyone for the time being. "Please head back," uttered Sam. On the other hand, when people began to leave, some of them abruptly cursed and wondered whether they were required to appease Sam, while others expressed sorrow over the fact that they had only supported Shin Wound, which would have resulted in him taking Sam's place. Sam smiled at the folks around him, despite the fact that he had just heard all of that, and was convinced that he was about to lose his mind if people didn't stop. On the other hand, Kang disclosed to Sam that he was going to be absent from the residence for a couple of days and gave Sam strict instructions to prevent anyone from entering his room and to pretend that he was still present. Kang abruptly said farewell to Sam, who was crying at the time. He didn't want any arguments or explanations, since he didn't want them. After that, he wandered around a large mountain, and eventually he came to a cave, where a sinister air was moving toward him when he saw it. He was taken back because it was a curse that had been crafted by Quack's subordinate, and after that, he allowed the curse to permeate his entire body. He couldn't help but grin all of a sudden, since Quack was so angry because things hadn't gone their way, but it worked out perfectly for him because he was in desperate need of mana at the time. He rose up and felt the curse inside his body before the hologram emerged and announced that the amount of death sent by the unknown had increased potentially and exceeded the maximum amount the body can absorb, while his body is now filled with Death Kai. He was overjoyed as a result of the fact that his adversary who had sent Death Kai had caused his body to become saturated with yin mana, because he was interested in putting it to the test. He conjured up the skeleton of an assassin following the arrival of the light. The skeleton was revealed. He was perplexed when he first observed the appearance of the skeleton due to the fact that it is not a dark skeleton, and it appears that not all skeletons of great martial artists have their bones turned dark. He is reminded of what Uil Lang told him about the skeleton, and as a result, he begins to contemplate whether or not he should murder the skeleton. That being said, he is rude even though he was a skeleton. However, the undead that he summoned was the spirit of Gamin, whom he defeated a while ago. He instructed the skeleton to hand him his martial arts, but he was shocked because the undead resisted his command. The hologram appeared and told him that he fulfilled their requirement for the hidden quest, but he has to obtain the desire of the undead. Another hologram appeared and stated that the undead is not able to forget his grudge of dying in his hand, and the undead agrees to give his martial arts if Kang will pay with his one arm. His reward was a peak of martial arts, flowing, chasing, ghastly blood claws that Gunam used to possess when he was still alive. Kang forms a grin on his face, and he will show the skeleton what his place is for demanding one of his arms. Until he takes out again the skeleton of Gunam, he will make him suffer from continued pain. Then he summoned 2 skeletons for their martial arts, so that Gunam could reflect on himself until Kang killed him again. He asks against, and the skeleton of Gunam to hand him his martial arts. Afterwards, the hologram appeared again and stated that Kang obtained the hidden quest, which is the desires of the undead, 2 and 3. Kang was full of joy, because he can obtain the sacrifices of the martial artist. If he completes their quest, he will also find out all about it, thanks to Uil Lang for transferring his martial arts. Without even asking, because he doesn't have to learn the first-rank martial arts, so he snaps his finger so that the 2 skeletons may go back in. But he noticed that the 2 skeletons were Zappo-pointed, so he told them not to be, because he had already had a martial art that he wanted to learn. Furthermore, Kang was kneeling on the ground, sweating and gasping for air while a sword was on his side. He's experiencing it again, but it's really trash. He looked behind him and found the skeleton of Uil Lang, and seemed to be laughing at him, so he abruptly stood up and said that he was trying his best. Then he lifted his sword and tried again. He releases his yin mana on his sword, and the sword suddenly forms a purple light. Following that, he utilized the Kai of the Eastern Shining Sage, age followed by the art of the Lightning Thunder God, and finally the Kai of Thundercloud, after performing the 12 swords of Thundercloud with his sword, which had reached its maximum potential power. He raised it above his head and executed the Thundercloud slash on the ground. But he immediately muttered an expletive when he realized that he had failed once more, because the fissures in the ground were too little despite the fact that he had applied such enormous effort. Kang was of the opinion that there was an extremely large gap between the power of Guam's martial arts and those of Uil Lang's. However, this is not an issue with either the inner Kai or the body. Rather, there is a significant distinction between the two. When the skeleton of Uil Lang suddenly pointed its finger on his back, he was taken aback, he was perplexed. So he turned his head to check what the skeleton was doing, and he discovered that the skeleton was quickly poking its finger multiple times on his back. This baffled him further, so he turned his head again when He discovers that he has been practicing martial arts with monocircuits rather than pressure points, and that he has not been using all of his pressure points. Because of this, all of the locations on his body that UIL Lang had been prodding are the locations on his body where his monocircuits are blocked off. Kang started to open all of his pressure points as Yu Lang sat behind him and poked him with the Kai of the Eastern Shining Sage. This shouldn't be a problem, because Yu Lang has the power to counteract the negative effects of his ability, so everything should be okay. On the other hand, the hologram materialized and informed him that he had achieved the ability of the peak swordsman as well as the skill known as Sword Kai, and that his level had also improved. In addition to that, he is able to unlock other powers, such as Corpse Explosion Soul Barrier and Phantom Robe, despite the fact that his necromancy has reached the B+ rank, and so on.